HPX LOTM, please call me Mr. Error. By author, Hoyne_Kyoma chapter 479 to 498. Information beyond this point must stay a secret. Not just because it is vital to what we will be doing, but also because of the contract. If any of us become a leak, everyone else in the group that has signed the contract will know. So make sure you don't if you don't want to be kicked out of our circle. Everyone shivered a little, but Hermione hadn't stopped. She'd only paused to let them digest the first point, after which she continued. Also, if any of you betray us, you'll lose your memories of all the time you've spent with us. Everyone's eyes widened. Loki was still yawning though since he hadn't caught up on enough sleep as he was studying the Room of Requirements runes last night. Hermione's smile started to look dangerous to everyone else, which caused them to frown since she'd caused them to be trapped in something rather dangerous. But Loki spoke through his yawn. If you're afraid, just walk away right now. Ya WWNNNN, you won't lose much of anything. Ya WWNNNN, she didn't tell you that cause a notarized contract is pretty expensive and she probably didn't want to have to renotarize the contract after she spotted this loophole. Everyone deadpanned and they all saw Hermione blush before she glared at Loki, who was already about to fall asleep on the table in front of him. But it did its work. The tone was jovial once again and no one had left, yet. When the atmosphere turned normal once again, Hermione spoke up. I'm sure most if not all of you know that the Ministry has been trying to seal up any information regarding you-know-who. There were short gasps but Hermione continued regardless. I want you to know that through some sources that I cannot currently disclose because of certain reasons, I would like to tell you that he has not just revived, but is gathering a force to shake. And who says that it's true? A random student Loki didn't even recognize spoke up, causing Hermione to stop and look at him. Harry's seen it, so it's all word of mouth. Who says he's not lying to make this all up? The boy asked again. And while those that worked in the unspeakables all wanted to punch the boy, they held themselves back when Loki stood up. But something was wrong. Why is Loki looking at the wall with such a shocked expression on his face? Everyone was about to question Loki, but suddenly another person walked in through the wall that Loki was looking at. The person was built like a kind boy, about their age, but he had a certain intoxicating charm around him. Loki and Harry recognized him immediately, Tom Riddle. Nearly all those who could used spirit vision to ascertain if they were looking at some sort of illusion, used it to understand what had just happened. Perhaps a ghost had floated in. A poltergeist. But to their shock, Tom looked completely normal in their view. But in the time everyone tried to figure out how the boy had walked through the wall as if it didn't exist, the boy spoke calmly. Why are you here? The Tom asked politely. What? Are you going to toss me out? 'Cause if you do my memories won't be wiped, will they? Since I never left voluntarily. I doubt she's taken that into account, the boy stated with a sneer. Everyone else's eyes shimmered at the information about this new loophole in the contract. Tom however smiled. I haven't ever seen you before, but seeing you now, you're pretty clever. Or should I say foolish? You don't live up to the hype at all. Foolish. Why? Do you think you can kill me so easily? The boy asked with his sneer widening. Tom only smiled softly. No. Not yet. Not when everyone's here. Especially when I barely noticed it given my skill. Oh. The boy looked surprised for a second. I was caught. Clearly you were, or do you want to be a child and pretend that you never lost the game by flipping the table just like one? Tom teased. Although none of the other people could understand what Tom meant by flipping the table, they did feel a slight shiver run down their spine because of the way he said it. They didn't like it one bit. He's not going to kill us, is he? Everyone wondered. Hermione had her hand on her wand, her spirituality already primed and ready to fire. Cedric and Co all had their Beander abilities ready. Even the other students who had worked as interning unspeakables had their abilities ready. Under their intuition, both the boys were starting to feel scary. Students even cleared a small circle around them because of it, adjusting themselves in the small area inside the inn. The staring contest between Tom and the boy continued for a few more seconds of silence until Tom spoke. So, are you going to try and control my spirit-body threads? But I should admit, your skill with manipulating the sea of subconscious of all these kids, so effortlessly, even though it's just a replication, it's rather clean. I am tempted, but I have this feeling that it'll be bad to control your spirit-body threads regardless of my skill. Especially when this skill didn't get me past your eyes, the boy said, his smile deepening as his tone chilled and turned emotionless. Tom smiled and raised his wand and said, well, it's time for you to leave now. There was a tense environment hanging in the entirety of the bar. Tensions were so high that almost everyone had their nerves drawn tight. Harry was almost ready to use all his physical force to snap the backs of whoever attacked first. And with Tom raising his wand, everyone looked at him with focus. Except Tom lowered his wand slowly without even using a spell, leaving everyone confused. Tisk. The old fool didn't even leave me a goodbye. Tom said with a soft laugh as he shook his head in disappointment. Huh. Everyone looked at Tom with confusion until Neville in the audience pointed out the obvious. He's gone. Everyone's eyes switched towards the boy that was just arguing with Hermione and then had an impromptu fight with Tom. The boy was truly gone. He wasn't visible in anyone's spirit vision and neither was he available in anyone's normal sight. The boy had truly vanished. Except they heard Neville speak again. Even he's gone. Everyone looked back at Tom's position and he was gone too. It left them all stunned and confused and quite possibly bamboozled. Loki, however, realized something else. He realized that Luna had already seen through it all and had understood the truth of the matter. So he quickly made eye contact with her and smiled. Luna simply shrugged her shoulders and went back to staring at the beetle on her finger. You aren't supposed to be here. I guess I can keep you in my antivivarium. The beetle looked like it had received a sudden shock, but before it could do much else, Luna tapped her wand on it and caused it to freeze in place. After which she stuffed it into a shell in her oceanic necklace. But everyone else wasn't as chilled out as Luna was. They were all looking at each other with wide eyes before all looking at Hermione, who was just as clueless about the situation. Harry interrupted. That was a younger you-know-who. He's a coalition of you-know-who's memories from school. I've met him twice before, once when he opened the Chamber of Secrets and once more last year when he declared he was going to fight against the current you-know-who. A stunned silence gripped the entire atmosphere. This has to be a joke, right? Someone whispered with worry, but there was no response from anyone. It was clear that this wasn't an act that Hermione had set up. Are you serious? No one knows who that was. The Beyonders could verify that the people they'd seen were real, so they didn't share the opinion lightly, afraid of making a mistake. They knew whoever they had just seen was as real as people could get. Yet their silence turned the atmosphere dreary since they were supposed to be intelligent. Cedric and company looked at Loki, but he wasn't as calm as before. And if one looked carefully, they could see that his hands were trembling a little, spooking them a little. Which left everyone else stumped about what to do. Well, apart from Luna. The situation was about to turn sour, but Hermione didn't let the opportunity slip by. Instead she spoke boldly. As you've seen, there are secrets in our world that even we don't know about, regardless of where you come from. And these secrets are important enough that we need to learn them to be able to protect ourselves against them. I hope everyone can agree that we need to learn how to defend ourselves against such threats. So that we won't be so vulnerable anymore. I promise to you that we'll have answers regarding what just happened by our first meeting. But Hermione's words alone couldn't shake the atmosphere immediately. So Loki weighed in. If you're wondering why we did nothing immediately and were leaning towards the fact that we might have been too scared to act, I can assure you that was not the case. Nearly 13 people in the room had already pulled out their wands and primed them with spirituality to attack if things went wrong even slightly. Everyone's eyes widened, but the 13 people who had primed their wands with spirituality and their Beyonder abilities all froze at Loki's keen insight. But no one was in the mood for that today, so they let Hermione end it for today. Let us gather after dinner at the 7th floor of the castle. I have found a place for us to be able to train in without having to worry about spying eyes, and since it is inside the castle, I'm sure such a thing will never happen again. I will inform you of the meeting dates." Loki nearly groaned when he heard that Hermione knew about the room of requirements. His brain fired up as he looked at Luna, and it was her turn to simply shrug casually this time, which infuriated Loki a little since Luna had used his own trait card against him. "What will Grandma think? I really hope 2 people can use it at once. And I hope Myone doesn't tell people how to use the room. I don't want to have my nightly research time by a bunch of kids dating in the place. Ag. Yuck." Loki groaned, but everyone just walked past thinking that he was worried about having to climb up to the 7th floor after dinner with a full stomach each night since he was from Slytherin. It did give them something to laugh about though as they all left the inn, yet looking from afar one could see just how they'd instinctively gotten closer to each other to protect their backs from any sudden attacks. N 3 delayed. 1 posted, 2 more to go. Inside the room of requirements before the first gathering of the club Hermione had founded, Loki was sitting with his eyes closed as he sipped on some rejuvenation tea occasionally. That child that no one knew about. No, it would be wrong to think about it like that. That wasn't a child. It was likely a Beyonder of the White Tower pathway, someone who had worked closely with Spectator pathway Beyonders because he was able to skillfully manipulate the body of heart and mind of everyone in the room without their notice through planting suggestions like I do using the Sea of Subconscious. That child didn't even exist, and yet everyone felt like he did when he was talking back to Myone. He had it all, a body of heart and mind, a spirit body, an astral body, that was enough to fool nearly all the Beyonders in the room. The one other person he failed to fool was Luna, who could immediately tell the boy didn't have a soul, but even I had to do a double take and doubt myself for a second when I saw that the person had a spirit thread. It was only when I realized that the boy had no soul that I stopped second-guessing myself to figure out what exactly the boy was. An illusion, but not like the ones I make all the time. No, this illusion was one made by manipulating everyone's minds. In the exact opposite way a spectator's psychological invisibility works, like a virtual persona of a sequence 4 manipulator's virtual persona. But given the boy had a spirit body thread, the person behind it clearly knows about them, since he went to the extent of creating a fake fate for the boy so that information about him could be divined just as he wanted it to be. Who could it be? For someone to know about spirit body threads, they have to be either a full pathway Beyonder or an error pathway Beyonder. Everyone else only has access to fate through visions, not even the monster pathway can see spirit body threads directly. But the knowledge about these pathways is concealed by Salazar. So either the person behind it all is a demon and she is trying to cook something up, or the person behind all of it is someone that knew about them before Salazar concealed them all. A person that has survived through at least 2 epochs. That is a very wide net of time to cast to narrow it down to a single person. Are there any other clues regarding the matter that I can extrapolate? Loki thought hard. Could it be a demon? If it were a demon, what would it want to achieve by aggravating a bunch of children rebelling against a teacher? This matter is too small for her to have interfered. Unless she wanted to delay its formation, but is there really anything for her to achieve if a bunch of students learn to defend themselves against minute threats? No, that feels too far-fetched. Maybe it is a demon's personal vendetta. But neither I nor Luna noticed any corruption in its soul, or rather the lack of one, and given how all the other good demons are still hiding, it can't have been one of them too. So it's a person that has lived 2 epochs. Again, that doesn't narrow it down by much. But what about another angle? A person from the White Tower pathway that has close relations with a member of the Spectator pathway, who is patient enough to explain to him his abilities so that the White Tower pathway member can replicate them. Grindelwald. Loki frowned since the conclusion was a little unsettling. He's a member of the Fool pathway and has lived through 2 epochs. Single quote. Loki didn't know what to say or think. Wouldn't the Black family have some records about him if they did? Well, they didn't have records of Merlin now that I think about it. Or did they? And they're just not in the house. Perhaps Grandma knows more about them. Alright, I'll send her a letter to ask her about it. Why do I feel like I'm forgetting something I promised Grandma about? Well, if I don't remember, then it's probably not that important anyway. Loki quickly penned a letter but paused before he was about to send it through Sunny. I'll send it in the morning. He didn't want to be informed of having to pretend to be the fiancé of some other girl now. Loki stole the letter, transforming it into a rune before turning to the one task he had to accomplish tonight. He got up from his chair and walked up to a simple wall in the room. All right, reveal yourself, Loki said as if he were casting Revelio on the room, but he was just being dramatic, yet the room obeyed his orders and opened the same cupboard that he had been frequenting in the past few days. The cupboard that held the room's runic circuitry. After several nights of studies, Loki had a rudimentary understanding of what the runes did and how they functioned. It wasn't that the runes were too advanced for it to go into his head or that Rowena was extremely skilled at it all, but it was because there were too many runes involved in the circuitry, enough that they even troubled Loki very much. Also, the fact that Loki couldn't damage anything while experimenting with what each section did played a large role in why understanding them was a slow process. Loki had managed to make a simple map of the room at any given time by hacking into its runic circuitry. It was a rudimentary map that worked much like the Marauder's map. It was useless ordinarily, but it was helpful for Loki in the sense that it could let him spot any mistakes he would have made with his edits to the runic circuitry of the room. It helped him see exactly which parts of the rooms he might have snuffed out of existence by editing the wrong runes. As such, the knowledge he currently had was enough for the small modification Loki wanted to make to the circuitry. Loki pulled out his wand and began carving runes in the air with his spirituality. Each movement was slow and precise as Loki took care not to let anything already existing get damaged. His runes slowly floated away from the tip of his wand and gently landed on the circuit in front of him. The outer section of runes slowly dissolved into the circuit in front of him as they formed the connection points that he was going to use to hack his own little modifications to the grand architecture of the room. Once the outer layers dissolved, the inner layers stopped moving. They hovered above the circuit like they'd been frozen in time. Loki examined the room around him with his spirit vision, trying to find any abnormalities in it, and once he was satisfied, Loki clapped his hands to praise himself. I knew it wouldn't fail. I'm a genius after all. Loki flicked his wand and closed the cupboard before he froze as he heard the room tremble a little. Don't tell me I missed something. Loki panicked and quickly flicked open the cupboard to hack into it a slightly complex runic circuitry which gave him the map of the room. But as he did, his brows rose in surprise. So I was just in time. The three-dimensional map hovering in front of Loki showed his room in the room of requirements, but at the same time he could see a second room right beside the one he was currently in. And in it were a few other people, starting with Hermione Granger. ___. 4 chapters delayed. 1 uploaded. So soon. Did I miss the invite? Loki wondered for a moment as he noticed Hermione's name on the map, but he quickly realized that this wasn't the first meeting of Hermione's little club. No, not everyone was here in the room right now. It was only Hermione, Luna, Astoria, Harry, and surprisingly Cedric. Are they scouting out the location? A funny idea slipped into Loki's mind. I don't have the Mentor of Deceit Beander characteristics, but I should be able to deceive Harry as long as I just use the Room of Requirements defensive barriers by incorporating them into my act. Even though it seemed like Loki was doing this purely for fun, he was not. Loki spoke softly. Could you prepare 5 more cups of tea for me? The room responded with silence, but for a second the teacup hovering beside Loki buzzed a little as it split apart into 2. Then the 2 cups buzzed until they doubled into 4 before 1 cup from the new pairs buzzed and divided into 2, leaving 5 cups hovering around him. That's nice. Loki then willed the Room of Requirements to take the shape of the Saphira Castle, making sure to imagine every last bit of the castle to be as he remembered it to be, along with the vast amounts of gray fog hovering on the floor. In front of his very eyes, everything around him was deconstructed into palettes of colors before they were rearranged, expanding and morphing into walls, floors, and tables that looked like they had been plucked straight out of his monochrome imagination. Loki examined the area with a sharp gaze as the room's magic halted for a few moments as it waited for his eager praise. Loki kicked a bit of the gray fog that was cascading around his foot. He obviously didn't feel any special powers from the gray fog that the room of requirements had created, but it looked indiscernible from his imagination. To anyone other than himself, who had a deep sense of connection to the gray fog, the scene inside the Saphira castle and currently in the room of requirements would seem identical. And so Loki nodded with a light smile. "Phew, you're good," Loki said as he felt the room's magical fluctuations buzz in joy. With that done, Loki imagined something else. A few minutes earlier, Hermione looked around the 7th floor corridor as she waited for Luna along with Harry, Cedric and Astoria. "Are you sure there's an abandoned classroom for us to use here, Hermione?" Cedric asked with a frown since he couldn't see anything different around them. "Could it be that we have to walk into the painting and it's just an illusion?" he asked, placing his hand on the tapestry depicting Barnabas the Barmy teaching trolls to dance. "Nope, it's as real as such an old painting would feel," Cedric concluded after the troll wearing the pink tutu fell backwards as it felt Cedric's fingers flip it off balance while it tried standing on its toes. Hermione observed this and frowned, but once she looked at the stars through the large window at the end of the corridor she relaxed. "No stars of warnings for me in the sky. Although Mercury is entering retrograde soon, is it a warning of misfortune since Neptune is in the sky too?" Hermione frowned for a few moments before shaking her head and looking back at the staircase as she heard soft footsteps. It wasn't the sound of heels clicking against stone but rather the sound of soft feet stepping over the cold stones of the castle. Hermione quickly walked towards the stairs and watched as the blonde head of a girl only a year younger than her appeared after a turn as she climbed the stairs. "Luna, what took you so long?" Hermione asked a little annoyed. Luna looked up and spoke blankly. "The Nargles were playing tricks, Aga." Not one to have the patience to listen to Luna's nonsense, Hermione quickly shook her head and interrupted while grabbing Luna's hand and pulling her up so that they could do what they'd come here for quickly. "Where's the abandoned classroom you told me about? I want to check if we'll need to make any modifications. You told me it would be large enough. But I want to see if we can include a small dueling range in the room so that we can also gain some practical skills." Hermione continued speaking and Luna only looked at her with her perpetually surprised expression. Yet if Loki had been there he would have realized that Luna was thinking something along the lines of, "What a strange creature, it speaks so much." When they reached the middle of the corridor, Luna tugged at Hermione's hand, causing her to stop. "What happened?" Hermione asked confused. Cedric though interrupted. "Where did your shoes go?" Luna looked at him but just as she was about to speak, Hermione spoke again because she didn't want to let Mercury enter retrograde. "Later. I want to make sure that there'll be no problems today. And the sooner we see it, the sooner we can learn if you and Harry have enough space for a mock duel." Cedric felt a little surprised by Hermione's restlessness but nodded nonetheless. As such, Hermione turned back to Luna and asked her a simple question, "Where's the room, Luna?" Luna simply pointed at the painting. "Through the painting. So there's some secret hiding within it after all," Cedric whispered as Harry quickly activated his eyes of demon hunting. Harry's already green eyes shimmered as green runes floated around it. But Harry only frowned. "There's nothing behind the wall. I can't see any signs of the wall having been moved." "Are you sure?" Luna nodded. She then freed herself from Hermione before she began walking up and down the corridor while mumbling something that all the Beyonders there quickly caught. "A room for studying defense against the dark arts." Just as Hermione was about to question Luna again with the question on everyone's minds, they froze when they felt the wall opposite to the tapestry tremble a little. There was no dust or even shifting around. It was as if a true miracle had occurred. The stone bricks used to create the wall collapsed in on themselves soundlessly as they gave way for an inconspicuous door that would blend well since it appeared just as one of the many broom closet doors in the entire castle. Cedric's brows shot up in surprise as he looked at Harry, wondering if he'd caught any changes, but Harry shook his head and shrugged to show his failure to comprehend how all of it worked. Luna simply looked back at Hermione wordlessly. How did this remain so? Hermione started, but Cedric finished, hidden. And Hermione nodded. Yeah, George and Fred should have found it long ago. I'm surprised they didn't know about it. Harry chimed in. Everyone looked at Luna for answers and she did not disappoint them. This is the home of a god. Except everyone froze at her answer. Cedric and Harry looked at Hermione. She was the current team leader, and so it was up to her to decide what they would do. Hermione looked back at the stars to make a guess about her own fate and disregarded Luna's words when she saw that there was no twist waiting for her apart from what she'd seen earlier. No immediate danger, Hermione reminded herself. Hermione sighed to release her tension before simply pushing open the door and entering calmly. A.N. 4 missed. 2 posted. As Hermione stepped into the room, she found herself a little surprised by all that was in front of her. The room was lit with an abundance of torches hanging on the walls, which by themselves seemed sturdy enough to take the full force of any spells that they could cast inside the room. That did not mention the abundance of magical energy Hermione could feel radiating off the stone walls. Hermione's eyes reached the roof and the realization caused her to become a little stiff. Hanging from the ceiling were several cages with a variety of magical beasts in them. They were currently all asleep, no doubt a magical occurrence possibly powered by the room itself, but Hermione had read through Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them enough times to know that each of the beasts trapped in those cages up above were dangerous enough to kill someone on accident. Eventually, however, she managed to drag her eyes back from the ceiling to the long pillar of stone in the center of the room that seemed to be supporting the high roof, which was shrouded fully in darkness itself. The shadows cast from the long central pillar obstructing the torches placed all around organically divided the room into sections of various needs. The plainest section was one that had several rings drawn or rather painted on the floor, which Hermione recognized as dueling rings. Although plain, the boundaries of each ring had mattresses that would help cushion the fall of anyone fated to be blasted out of it. There were several dummies in the area too for people to practice by themselves if they didn't have a partner. The closest area to it was one filled with several herbs and cauldrons, no doubt to prepare potions that would help heal all these injuries. I wonder where the ingredients and animals came from. The Forbidden Forest. That just makes all this even more mysterious, doesn't it? Why would there be such a room in Hogwarts? And why would it remain undiscovered for so long? Was Luna right when she said that it was the residence of a true god? Hermione clenched her fists, but Harry's words snapped her out of it. Hermione, they've got books. Not just ones about how to defend ourselves from simple spells, but also ones that involve dark magic. This will be perfect for us to learn how to defend ourselves from him. Hermione's eyes snapped to the short storage of books as her eyes landed on the book Harry was about to pick up, but before he could do anything. Flick. Hermione's wand flicked as Harry's robes locked his hands. Don't touch a book you don't know about. They could be cursed. Harry's eyes widened and he nodded, allowing Hermione to let him go as Cedric spoke up this time. The books are dangerous. We'll have to clean several of them up, or at least restrict their access so that not many people learn them. He was staring closely at a dusty book that was half opened and lying open on a table. But, oh please, cursed, these books. For God's sake, these books are so tame. Astoria complained as she simply picked up a random book. A large black mass was ejected out of the book as she said so, but before anyone could react, Astoria snapped her fingers, causing the black mass to in horrendous pain. Astoria had used her Beander ability, Psyche Storm, on whatever it was that had tried cursing her. The sound would have left everyone's ears ringing, but they suddenly realized that they couldn't hear a thing. They weren't plunged into silence, meaning that their ears still worked, but it seemed like whatever was wailing suddenly couldn't make a sound anymore. Confused, they all looked around for which one of them had saved the day, but they were surprised when they saw that neither Hermione nor Harry had pulled it off. Luna, on the other hand, just stared at a random wall, but everyone ignored her as they chalked up the strange happening to the supremely magical room helping them out. Everyone, however, gathered at the fourth section, which was a plain lounge. They looked around for a few seconds before turning to Hermione once again. Now what? Astoria asked, do you want me to perform the ritual? Hermione nodded, if the ritual can do what you say it can, I want to make sure it happens as fast as possible. I've been meaning to ask, but what ritual? Harry asked and Cedric also leaned in. Hermione looked at Astoria for permission and once she got a soft nod in response she took charge in explaining to them what Astoria had told her. It's a ritual to prevent anyone from being able to divine anything about this place at least until they're an angel. Although Astoria's ritual worked even for a true god not directly having domain over fate, she didn't know it herself because she didn't know that a true god was just another sequence 0. To her, the concept of a true god was still someone beyond the sequence. But Hermione knew, from using her overpowered Saphira Castle-powered divination about the ritual and her knowledge about sequence 0, but she didn't reveal anything about it. Especially because she didn't want to upset the true god of the monster pathway, who was the most likely candidate, performing the ritual deed, since she didn't want to pick a fight with Lady Luck. But the simple fact that this would keep out even an angel had shocked both Harry and Cedric. Luna was still staring at the wall, though, she was even making various strange expressions, but because she had turned away from everyone else, no one noticed them. I hadn't thought of that. Harry admitted. Cedric shook his head with a wry smile. I thought we'd be using a normal ritual, I came prepared with the ingredients. Haha. Well, I guess I should have expected this from the student that's at the top of the class. Once things were cleared, Hermione turned towards Astoria. You can start as soon as you wish. Do you need us to go outside? Astoria shook her head. No, but I need you to give me the contract we signed on. It'll help me involve everyone else into the ritual too. Hermione nodded and fetched the contract out of her bag of holding with a simple accio and handed it over to Astoria. And in a few minutes, with everything needed for the ritual prepared, Astoria knelt in front of the altar as the rest of the people present just watched the ritual happen quietly. Luna also appeared to have finished her conversation with the wall, and was standing beside everyone silently. I pray for the power of fate. I pray for the power of curses and calamities. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I pray for the goddess's great powers to curse everything about this place with the quality that it will never be found. Daphne flower, a fragrance that belongs to fate, I pray for you to bestow powers to my incantation. Greengrass dew, the liquid that belongs to the settlement of fates, I pray for you to bestow powers to my incantation. Astoria said as she dropped the notarized contract in front of the candle representing the goddess of fortune. There was silence for a few seconds before everyone in the room had their hair stand on end. They all felt a powerful, indescribable and indiscernible gaze that felt like it had no origin or end penetrate into their very beings. It felt as if their very lives were being weighed on scales. Hello. Been a busy with IRL stuff lately. Sorry for the delay, things should be quicker from tomorrow. The pressure lingered harmlessly over all of them for a few moments before it seemed to have become colored in a tinge of happiness. But with the minds of gods being a can of worms, dealt like a hot potato, no one dared even entertain the thought of peering into the emotion in their mind. All except Hermione, who was rather inquisitive. The goddess is happy. Happy to see Astoria. No, that didn't seem to be the case. She only turned happy after a few seconds passed, seconds that she would have used to look at us. Perhaps someone here piqued her interest. Single quote. Harry. Oh, it could also be this room, since it seems to be so special. Before Hermione could think any further, a ball of light appeared in the air a few feet above Astoria's head. Huh. Everyone was taken aback by what they saw, for the ball of light didn't seem to emit any light at all. Even though it was colored a pure white that seemed to resemble a simple lumos charm, it cast no shadows. The light sank slowly, like a feather, twirling around as it swayed due to the currents in the air. Anticipation built up in the minds of all the people in the room as they paid attention to the strange light ball to see what it would do. While for others it was just a scene to witness the miraculous powers of a god in real life, to Hermione, who knew that the source of all magic were true gods themselves, it was more of a scientific curiosity as she watched carefully, trying to understand if there was anything she could glean from it to strengthen herself. Everyone in the room stilled as their breaths settled, each making sure not to disturb whatever was happening in their own way as they watched the light ball fall. Just as the ball was about to touch the floor, however, it stopped, causing everyone to feel even more confused. Giggle giggle. Huh. Harry was the first one to react as he looked around himself while the rest of them were still surprised that they seemed to have heard the goddess giggle to herself. All of a sudden they were no longer at Hogwarts. Their entire surroundings were drowned by thick gray fog. Gone were the plain old walls. Instead, what replaced them was a thick waterfall of gray fog which formed opaque curtains that appeared to have sealed them away from the world. Cedric almost instantly wanted to apparate away, but his eyes dilated for a second before he forgot what he had been meaning to do. Luna only looked around in confusion before looking slightly above them. Astoria, still kneeling, had her mouth hanging open as her mind started to panic. The ritual failed and I contacted a mysterious entity. How? I chanted all the incantations perfectly. Did I not? Astoria didn't want to believe that she had messed up. Especially not when she'd been taught these words ever since she could speak, so that she could ask the goddess of fortune for help whenever she could. But not believing it only meant something worse. It meant that another god had hijacked the ritual. Which meant that the god was either stronger than the goddess of fortune or that she was dead, and that someone else had taken her place. Astoria shivered with fear since she was the one who had opened the connection to this new entity. Hermione's reaction, however, was the most pronounced. Her mouth instantly clenched as she saw the person sitting at the far end of their vision. Hermione's mouth opened and closed several times in the span of a few seconds as she failed to form words. Mr. Error. ... Meanwhile, a few minutes earlier, Loki stole space to teleport around the wall of his room in the room of requirements into the one Hermione and company had created. Although the concept of space was wonky inside the room of requirements, for Loki, who had studied the room extensively, he knew its tricks like the back of his hand, and as such was able to pull off the teleportation seamlessly. It took Loki a few seconds, however, to react, since almost as soon as he teleported into the room, he found Luna staring directly at him. Who keeps their spirit vision on all the time? And how can she even still see me without losing her mind altogether because of my mythical creature form? I'm a demigod, aren't I? Do planters have some unique method to dodge madness? Or is it because they're inherently maddened? Like Lee and Luna? Loki questioned himself as he belatedly realized that Luna could directly see his soul. As such, Loki brought his finger to his lips to indicate silence. But Luna kept staring at him. Oh. Does she not know who I am? Can she only see my soul? No, that's not why she's still staring at me. Did she assume that as long as she stays silent she can stare at me all she wants? Yeah, that's probably more like it. Loki nodded to himself before he was about to sign that Luna shouldn't look at him, but before he did, Loki noticed Luna's shoes were missing. A frown formed on Loki's face almost immediately. Luna hadn't changed the shoes he'd gifted her ever. Even though she outgrew them after 2 years, she extended them using her own transfiguration skills and made sure to keep them clean and tidy. Loki and Luna even transfigured stitches of various creatures they met while they explored the Forbidden Forest and the Black Lake. It was an invaluable record of their friendship, much like a diary. So to see her bare feet once again, Loki found himself annoyed at the implications they brought up. What happened to your shoes, Luna? Loki asked by mouthing his lips. Having been ordered not to speak, Luna spoke by manipulating her spirituality intricately into letters which then formed words. Nargles. Luna didn't have to say any more since Loki immediately understood. Not wanting to ruin his mood right before his prank, Loki clenched his fists and decided to deal with the matter later before mouthing words at Luna once again. Pretend like you don't see me. Luna nodded and, since no one noticed their quick conversation, she went back to staring at the various things in the room of requirements. When should I execute my plan? Loki wondered as he watched everyone move around the room of requirements to explore it. For a few seconds even Loki was entranced by the various creatures that lived in cages hung high up in the ceiling. Loki could see that the cages were drugging the animals to stay asleep, and how they were reinforced with wards to make sure that whatever was trapped inside would remain inside forever unless let out on purpose. The animals weren't very dangerous, but they weren't creatures that lived on the edge of the Forbidden Forest either. The creatures were mostly rated 4X or XXX, but even some rather tricky and pesky creatures to deal with XX ratings. And given how each X in the classification meant the number of times you'd die if an average wizard fought one, it was safe to say that they were dangerous. Nice room I guess, but why'd they bring Tori here? Loki wondered, and when he heard Hermione's explanation, he nodded. I guess that makes sense. Loki was looking forward to the ritual since he'd never seen Daphne perform the ritual for the goddess of fortune before, and it seemed like a great god to know more about. As such, when Loki saw Astoria perform the ritual, he hid himself using the thin veil of gray fog he could still control after hiding Tom's body in the spirit world to make sure that unless he made any big movements or the goddess herself wished to find him, he would remain hidden. Except when the ritual finished, Loki sensed the gaze fall upon him almost immediately. Loki sensed joy, like everyone else too, but that wasn't what his focus was on right now. How? The ball of light fell into the room and Loki suddenly felt a terrible premonition of absolute danger if the ball was allowed to land in it. Before anything could happen, Loki's instincts reacted to steal the ball by turning it into a rune so that it wouldn't be able to do anything. Except midway through his theft, Loki realized that his sense of danger could have been misconstrued by the goddess of fortune, a weaver of fate, who was literally looking at him right now. But it was too late. As soon as Loki's spirituality touched the ball of light, it froze. And to his horror, before he could react, Loki felt someone snatch his control over the gray fog as he found the Saphira castle manifesting in the room of requirements. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Loki Neerdam instinctively expanded the rune holding back his divinity as he enforced it ruthlessly to gain his control over the Saphira castle back at once. It wasn't much of a fight since the other force pulled away as soon as it felt Loki enforcing his divinity, which left Loki with a bad taste since he couldn't even scratch them, but for now he didn't pursue since. Loki was flabbergasted. What? How did someone else control my connection to the Saphira castle? Loki's eyes behind the mirage that concealed his face had widened. His head churned at high speed as thoughts spun around in his mind before he landed on a possible answer. That door. Loki, however, had no more time to himself. Although he could still feel the gaze of the goddess of fortune upon him, it was infinitely weaker, almost as if it were only an imprint that was left behind on his body of heart and mind as a mere memory of a traumatic incident. Loki could easily separate it from himself with a theft, but he didn't. Based on what he'd figured out, the goddess of fortune was likely on his side. Yet still, as a precaution, Loki quickly flicked his hand and caused the gray fog to churn around the Saphira castle to cleanse it off any other being that might have been inside it other than him. Except to everyone else, those who'd just been unfairly tossed into the strange place that was mostly monochrome gray, it looked like they'd just angered an evil god. The gray fog thundered like a hurricane for a while until it calmed down slowly as Loki calmed down. He had been very spooked, but he made sure to keep his calm as he tried thinking of what he would do now. Loki immediately activated his spirit vision and did his best to look into the body of heart and minds of everyone around him. They're scared because of that little dance the gray fog did. Myone, you too. Who are you and what have you done to Myone? Where did that innocent girl who'd ask Mr. Error every random question she could think fearlessly go? Seeing the emotions of all the kids in the Saphira castle currently, Loki wondered for a moment if the goddess of fortune was enjoying his turmoil similarly, but quickly calmed himself. I'm the one that should give people terrors, it shouldn't be the other way round. Loki took a deep breath and finally let the gray fog settle fully, revealing the tarot club chair and table for everyone to see as he finally thought about what he would do next. Well, my plan was not much different, since I wanted to create the illusion of the error god waking up because they intruded on a relic he'd left behind at Hogwarts for other people to find out, and then pretend like I was going to give them the gift of studying in the true school I had hidden at Hogwarts several millennia ago. I'd have given them access to the dream school that I so painstakingly made. It would finally see some use instead of collecting dust by sitting here inside the Saphira castle. But now that I've shown them that I'm angry, I can't just give things away. Loki frowned. Mion's way to quiet. But before Loki could sigh in frustration due to the tense stalemate building up in the Saphira castle, he had a simple idea. If they don't want to ask me any questions, why don't I just make them? And so, Loki targeted the person with the weakest occlumency protections right now, Astoria, who was still trembling in fear as she felt the full force of the divinity of the god in front of them. And suddenly the tense silence snapped. I'm so sorry everyone. This is all my fault. Sob sob sniffle sniffle if I hadn't, sob 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 been careless, maybe the goddess wouldn't have been so angry with me. Astoria practically rambled as Loki poured in a stream of thoughts that were concerned with her life and that of those around her. But before Astoria could break down any further, Hermione stepped up and placed her hand on her shoulder while simultaneously giving her a light squeeze. It's not your fault, Astoria. None of us could have known, Hermione said, her tone barely a whisper but clear in the pending silence of the god in front of them. Harry walked closer to them and stepped in front of Hermione as Cedric stepped in front of Luna, who seemed rather annoyed that someone blocked her direct access to the god in front of her. But it wasn't like Luna could see much since she wasn't even a demigod yet, and the gray fog surrounding Loki obscured everything about him from view, even his soul. With his divinity on full blast, everyone in the Saphira castle felt afraid, but they only felt a light pressure on their bodies since Loki wasn't even a saint yet. But in their minds each of them had come to more or less the same conclusion, that he probably doesn't want to kill us, yet. They assumed that since they were only vaguely feeling it, the divinity wasn't concentrated at them. And felt that they'd have died long ago had the god felt like it. Being the most experienced with cases in the unspeakables, Cedric was about to speak but Hermione beat him to it. I'm sorry, but my lord, could we explain ourselves? Hermione said with her head bowed low as if she had just committed a grave mistake. Loki's smile returned when he saw Hermione talking to him. Good, good. Tarot Club's Miss Magician isn't afraid of anyone. Mr. Error only nodded without words. Astoria here had initiated a ritual aimed towards the goddess of fortune, but due to a mistake, likely on our part, we were sent here instead. We never wanted to bother or disturb your peaceful residence. Is it possible that we can put this incident behind us and leave unharmed? Loki almost deadpanned. Why's Mione talking to me like I'm some murderous god? Didn't I help her out so many times? I even gave her the door pathway as a gift. A secret pathway that no one knows about. Sigh. Well, let's get on with my plan, this is getting awkward. Loki was about to speak but this time it was Luna who interrupted. We won't leave unless you let all of us go unharmed. Everyone only thought Luna was trying to be brave, but only Loki realized that she was wondering if Loki was still alive since he was no longer with them and had vanished from her sight. So Loki sighed again. At least I know she's a real one. Gods, I hope I can settle out her Nargle's issues after all this is done, whoever does that to her. I'll make sure they pay the right price. Loki shook his head for a second before subtly nodding his head, asking Luna to look behind her where he'd reconstructed Loki only for her to see. How did he add a soul to his illusions? Well, Loki simply used a worm of time to temporarily make it seem like the illusion was alive. And while everyone else couldn't see anything, Luna calmed down when she realized that Loki was all right and would be going back along with them. Only after that did he start speaking again. Quote. I work on the principle of equivalent exchange, Loki said calmly and patiently, which caused ripples to spread out in the Saphira castle whose horizon was blocked by large walls of curtains of tumultuous and towering waves of grey fog. While the words were simple, they had other implications in everyone else's minds. He's asking us for payment to let us go. The price of our lives. The price we are willing to give to save ourselves. And while the words brought fear into everyone's minds as they readied to fight for their lives if they had to, bringing back much of the tension from before, it was exactly where I wanted them to be. Like dolls in the palm of my hands. Hee. Naive little babies. Forgot to post chapter when I posted on Patreon yesterday. Sorry for the delay. So, what are you willing to give to me? Loki asked nonchalantly as he coolly rested his chin on his intertwined fingers. The grips of everyone tightened around their wands. Hermione wanted to speak up, but she didn't know how she could convince her lord to let them leave without revealing her familiarity with Mr. Error to everyone else. But there was an even more important thought taking up space inside her mind, courtesy of all the fanfiction she'd written about him in her head. Was Mr. Error truly angry with us? Or was he just startled, like any normal person would be if someone barged into their apartment without permission? If Mr. Error is truly a person who does not know how to communicate with us properly, as I guessed earlier, perhaps he's asking us if we need something. No. Based on the principle of equivalent exchange, perhaps he wants us to do something for him and will reward us instead. But what would he want us to do? Spread his faith and help him gain believers. Suddenly Hermione grew very excited. She felt like she had grasped the crux of the matter, and as such, without any further delay, Hermione strode in front of everyone else, taking confidently measured steps as she walked up to the end of the table closest to her, directly opposite to where Mr. Error was sitting. Could we know what we could address you as, my lord? Hermione said softly, but her words caused a deep sense of panic in everyone else. Had Hermione been brainwashed? Perhaps a strong confundus charm was used to get her to obey the being in front of them like this. But none of them had noticed the being in front of them making any wand movements. In fact, they couldn't even see a wand on his person. Harry matched Cedric's gaze as they mentally communicated with each other about what steps they would take next, but with no concrete plans or even vague ones to escape from this place, they had to give up very quickly. The corner of Loki's lips twitched up into a happy smile. Miss Magician, you truly are the most inquisitive member of the Tarot Club and the best indeed. But since Loki never looked at her thoughts, he didn't realize that Hermione had gone one step deeper into a pit of girlish squealing joy. In the gospel that Mr. World wrote for us, it was clearly stated when Mr. Error helped Salazar Slytherin that he was the wooer of fate. Could it have meant the goddess of fortune? Is that why she sent us all here? To help Mr. Error? Did Mr. Error end up wooing her, after all? Is this her response? Had it not been for the situation they were currently in, Hermione would have giggled like a schoolgirl hearing gossip about her best friend's crush. But she kept herself calm and professional. Mr. Error pretended to be lethargic and completely uninterested in their conversation as he spoke plainly. You can refer to me as Mr. Error. Hermione nodded and spoke in a joyous tone, gladly, Mr. Error. I have a proposal. Could you grace some of your precious time to listen to my dull thoughts? Mr. Error took some time to answer, as each second passing by caused the tension in the room to only tighten. And just as Harry was about to interrupt, he spoke. Speaking was a harsh term for what Mr. Error did. Mr. Error simply placed his hands on the table as he looked in Hermione's direction. And while his face and by extension his eyes were covered up by the mirage that hid it all from view, Hermione realized that he was ready to listen to her. So Hermione continued, Mr. Error, letting us leave would work immensely towards your benefit. In fact, letting us all leave unharmed will give you the opportunity to extend your influence to the real world. Hermione paused as she gauged Loki's reaction, but seeing nothing to note yet, she continued. As you obviously know by now, Mr. Potter among us is the strongest and he is already a demigod, which means he can do things a lot of us cannot. He is also favored by the Hogwarts headmaster himself, which would mean that helping him would allow Mr. Potter to ask him to grant a wish for you. Loki was slightly interested, so he started calculating if he could realistically do anything with such a thing. A favor from Dumbledore, huh? What could I do with that? Create a fake Beander characteristic. While it isn't a terribly bad deal, it isn't outright good either, since getting him to do anything for me would involve leaking information about me or my plans to him either way. But it isn't like I'll be able to keep my plans a secret from him for much longer, since the more higher sequences my plan involves, he's bound to learn one or two things about it. I see. With Hermione pausing to see if Mr. Error accepted her proposal, Loki simply looked at Harry as if he was evaluating him. Everyone shivered as they felt the divinity around them grow stronger when Mr. Error looked at Harry. All of a sudden everyone was praising just how well Hermione was doing by pretending to be fearless in front of what was very likely a literal true god so that they could leave from here. Most of them even realized then that Hermione had truly struck gold with her methods. By telling Mr. Error that they could have future value, she had effectively given them a way to stay alive as long as they could prove their worth to him. And who knew if the god would really even think about them after they left this strange place? After all, a true god was bound to have better ways to carry out his evil deeds in the world, right? And along with all that, Hermione had revealed that Harry was heavily favored by Dumbledore, which acted both as a threat and an enticing opportunity, since if the true god was weak, then Dumbledore would be someone scary, but if he was someone strong, having the leader of the White faction in your pocket was good, right? Harry felt a little embarrassed at being used as a bargaining chip so blatantly by his friend. But he said nothing. After all, that was their best shot at getting out of this scary place where his instincts were continuously ringing about death at every turn. Which wasn't particularly hard to believe for him when they'd all witnessed the typhoon of gray fog that had begun spinning around them all earlier. So Harry braved through the heavy scrutiny that he felt gaze at his soul. Meanwhile, Loki's expression was strange. I can bury anything I want into Harry's body of heart and mind right now, but given that Harry's likely going to go to Dumbledore after this, he'll probably discover it immediately. And then there's that strange soul in his scar. Was that always there? Why had I never noticed it before? Loki was confused since he'd never seen such a thing before. The soul was feeble and weak. Almost as if simply blowing on it would cause it to shrivel up and die. Did I just miss it because it's so weak, or was it because of some mystical reason? Loki frowned. Should I simply steal it to see what it is? With but a thought, the entity residing in Harry's scar vanished. Loki didn't examine it for now and simply kept it inside its runic state. Even though he was confident nothing could harm him while he was inside the Saphira castle, he didn't want to drop his guard. Harry suddenly noticed his mind felt lighter. Of course, it was reasoned away. Am I going to faint? But Loki did notice the sudden startling surprise in the occlumency runes that had been guarding Harry's body of heart and mind. They looked positively confused about what had just happened. And that was when Loki realized that whatever he'd picked up was something very important. I should have known. But Dumbledore shouldn't be able to figure out where it went. I mean, he'll definitely know that I, Mr. Error, did it, but he'd never be able to figure out where the Saphira castle is. He hasn't, even with Snape constantly entering and exiting this place. But then Loki frowned as a strange thought surged to the top of his mind. Now that I think about it, why don't I do that? Loki felt a thrilling anticipation emerge in his mind as he stole something that was on Hermione's person. And with a casual flick of his hand, Loki conjured the item by converting it to its normal form. Loki read through the paper in his hands, even though he'd seen it before, but pretended to have it for the first time. The atmosphere of the situation changed drastically all of a sudden, as if plunged into a silence filled with recognition of danger. In the view of everyone standing in front of the large, elegant table, Mr. Error was sitting at the end of. They saw a man of tremendous poise shrouded by a mysterious gray fog as he calmly read through a piece of paper that glowed softly as if it were blessed by the sun herself. Everyone reacted differently when they noticed it. Harry nearly instinctively wanted to flick his wand to snatch the paper away from Mr. Error. Cedric flicked his wand to stop Harry's spell before it could be launched. Luna tossed one of the corks on the wreath around her neck into a random spot in the fog. Astoria's hand directed all misfortune towards herself. But Hermione stayed still. Yet, in mere moments, everyone shivered as they realized something strange. Everyone except Hermione realized that they could no longer use magic. In fact, they couldn't even feel their spirituality. Wordlessly, Loki had stolen everyone's magic circuits, leaving them all out of touch with their abilities. Mr. Error remained silent though, as if the paper in his hands had stolen all his attention. And a part of him truly was. As Loki examined the complicated piece of spirituality intertwined with the names written down in it, Loki understood how the contract worked and precisely who had made it. It was Amelia Bones. Loki hadn't truly expected it. Especially since even Walburga thought that the Bones family were part of the Arbiter pathway. It was rather unexpected, but Loki could clearly see the will of the person cleverly left behind in the spirituality in the paper. The will, as he observed it, resonated with the piece of spirituality that had floated into him after he'd signed the paper earlier. Although he'd tried understanding the spirituality inside his body before, Loki wasn't able to get much out of it because it was too little to touch without destroying. But now in the presence of the contract in his hand, in the presence of the will in the paper, the will in the spirituality inside his body reared its head. And it was the head of Amelia Bones. It was too dumb to be a real human. It was more of a figment of imagination, as Loki saw it. But that figment of imagination was enough to make Loki understand how it all worked. As long as the figment of imagination sensed someone breaking the contract, it would contract the true goddess of the sun pathway, Helga Hufflepuff. And well, if the figment of imagination managed that, there definitely wouldn't be much left behind as the body burnt away due to her mighty strength, probably not even ashes. It still wouldn't work on Loki though, since he could firstly just steal the foreign spirituality and throw it out of his body, and secondly he could simply cause it to activate while he was in the Saphira castle so that no other person, god or not, would be notified of it going off. With all that figured out, Loki didn't take more than a moment to decrypt where Hermione had gotten it. It was from Susan Bones. Yet the mystery about Susan Bones truly being from the Arbiter pathway and how Amelia Bones had managed to fool everyone so far remained a mystery, for now. It's more likely that Amelia isn't from the Sun pathway and just has some connections to Helga. But that would be even stranger. But as Loki thought of all this in the span of a few moments, another part of his mind had already calculated exactly how he could achieve what he wanted to do. Loki dropped the error blasphemy card into his soul under the cover of illusions and accommodated it immediately. The eyes of each student in the Saphira castle widened, even Hermione's, as they all suddenly felt an even deeper aura of suppression emerge from Mr. Error. Hermione was the first to collapse to her knees because the force was just that large. Luna and Cedric followed Astoria, who was already wallowing in self-pity. Harry bore the weight of it all as he tried activating any ability he could to save himself and everyone around him. While one part of his mind blamed himself for pulling out his wand and attacking a true god because he'd stolen something that could be used against him and all the people who signed on the paper after trusting him. Another part of his mind didn't care about all that right now, as all he wanted to do was save at least one person inside the place they were trapped in, so that they could be sent back and bring help in the form of someone strong, preferably Dumbledore himself, who seemed to be missing at every key moment in his life, somehow. Yet, no matter what ability he tried to activate, Harry found himself unable to do anything at all. It was a deep sense of powerlessness that was being etched into each one of their memories as the moments unfolded. Everyone just looked at the gray fog that was churning around them with fear as Mr. Error's body started to deform and grow unimaginably. Mythical creature form. Harry put together, barely. Their minds frozen, their bodies definitely frozen, and their hopes frozen and shattered, left to scatter with the wind. The swirling fog soon transformed into a sharp point that each of them thought was meant to obliterate them into dust as they closed their eyes to accept their fate. Harry stretched out his hand as he attempted to speak through all the pressure forcing him down, but no words left his mouth. The final moment stretched onto eternity as Harry watched himself lose consciousness. His final sight was the shining of a few tens of crimson lights that lit up in the distance before he fell into sleep, unable to tell what was real anymore. A few moments later, once Loki was sure everyone was out, he sighed. Loki expelled the error blasphemy card he'd just accommodated as he regained control over his sanity. Seriously. I didn't even do much. It was the measly aura of a true god. Tisk, tisk, tisk. And Dumbledore thinks that Harry's the savior of the wizarding world. How disappointing. Loki looked at the paper in his hand, and the reason he had just used the error blasphemy card to advance his sequence temporarily at the risk of his sanity. It was because Loki wanted to use the powers of Sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit to trick the will. Loki hadn't tricked the contract itself. No, that Loki could do without advancing to Sequence 3 by simply pushing enough thoughts into the will to brainwash it into thinking whatever he wanted it to do. It was just that dumb. What Loki actually did was use the thin connection between the will in the contract and the spirituality implanted into everyone who signed it, to link all of them with their crimson stars in the Saphira Castle so that he could enroll them into his school. How nice I am. I am giving them the opportunity to learn knowledge that can give them unimaginable power. For free. Only if I will it, of course. You, my head, Harry said painfully as he grabbed his head with both his hands. You're finally awake. Harry heard a familiar voice speak beside him. All of a sudden the memories of what had just happened came rushing back to him as he pushed himself off the ground to look around himself, trying to figure out if the threats to their life still remained. Although unfamiliar with the place he was inside, Harry visibly calmed down as he realized they were inside the room Luna had brought them into. The familiar dueling rings were painted on the floor he lay on, and the healing station was located some distance away to treat minor injuries. There was a cauldron sitting on eerie pink flames which hadn't been there before. Harry blinked a few times, as his surroundings came into focus. His glasses bent because of the awkward angle he had been in when he was pressed to the floor because of the famed Mr. Error. Finally, as his joints popped back into place, Harry looked at the person who was standing beside him, dropping an eerie green glowing potion near the nostrils of the next person unconscious beside him. Loki. Loki nodded. I woke up before all of you did, so I made use of the healing station to brew up something quick to get you back to your feet. I feel terrible, Harry concluded after he checked his body for any injuries. I'm only doing enough to make sure you can walk yourselves to Madame Pomfrey. Don't want to overextend and step into something I don't know, Loki said, his voice trailing off by the end as if he didn't want to recall something terrible. Harry's eyes widened slightly. Now that I think about it, you weren't there with us. In that place. I didn't see you. In front of Mr. Eyre, him. Harry asked astonished. Loki gave out a wry smile. I'd just slipped into the room when I was out on my nightly stroll around the castle, disguised by a simple disillusionment charm of course, and then I got sucked into the madness alongside you guys. Ah. Harry's eyes flickered with a little surprise as he recalled Luna continuously looking behind them when they were in this room and the place they'd been whisked off to after the ritual Astoria performed. In the span of the thin silence that grew between them after that, Harry watched as Loki dripped a few drops of the potion near everyone's nose. The smell wasn't pungent or terrible in any way. It was just an unbearable minty sort of smell. One that was bound to clear up your nose if it had clogged up. And it was effective too, since Harry watched everyone's nose twitch a little before they started to push themselves just like he had a few seconds ago. Everyone's reaction was almost like his too. They were startled for a few seconds, but they started to calm down when they realized that they were fine. Was that just some strange dream? Astoria asked, her voice trembling a little in fear as she instinctively moved closer to Loki, causing him to pat her head softly before pulling out a slip of paper. This was on the floor when I woke up. It's important, Loki said, his eyes reflecting a deep blend of worry and sadness. Harry reached out to grab it, but Hermione was quicker. She pulled the paper from Loki's hand as her eyes sped through it all. And her expression didn't instill any confidence in anyone else, not even as Hermione tried to clench the paper and give them a weak smile. It seemed like Hermione wasn't convinced by it herself as she finally gave up with a sigh before revealing what was inside it to everyone. We are prevented from revealing anything that happened today, in that strange place. That doesn't seem very bad, Cedric said with his brows raised as Harry nodded along. To not talk about something traumatic that happened to them. Wasn't that the best? While they might not be able to ask Dumbledore for help, simply getting out alive from that terrible place seemed like a win for everyone. But Hermione's smile turned into an unwilling and helpless frown that showed her frustrations regarding the situation. Not just us. Everyone in the contract that we signed, none of us. Cedric's eyes widened in shock while Astroya's knees nearly buckled. Luna became a little stiff. Not being able to discuss a true god was normal and more or less expected. No true god would want others to learn anything about them in the first place. As Beyonders, all of them had experience with having to keep their cards to themselves. Their mentalities had already shifted to view the world through such a lens. The true shocker was when Hermione explained that everyone in the seemingly ordinary contract that they had signed was subject to this restriction. Meaning that whoever it was that they had met in the strange place had some way to enforce it and control their actions. To do what? They didn't know, yet. But did they want to do it? Hell no. Who would want to be a slave to someone else willingly? Especially for someone to whom their lives were as worthless as ants were to them. Astoria's already weak knees gave as she collapsed. It was only Loki's timely support that managed to keep her standing as everyone rushed towards her to help her up. Being the closest to Loki, Hermione managed to support the girl until Cedric quickly brought a chair for her to sit on. Astoria looked completely spent, her hair roughed up from the ordeal she had just been through and due to the weight already on her shoulders. "What happened, Tori?" Loki asked with a gentle smile as he slowly pushed her hair behind her ears, revealing the unsightly face that was possibly the first time in history that anyone had seen a noble make. Astoria's eyes were red. Tears kept rolling down her cheeks with no signs of stopping. It was clear to everyone that Astoria was blaming herself. She wasn't really wrong to think that she'd just dragged everyone around her into danger, of the kind that they couldn't easily crawl out of. It was true that she'd been the one to initiate the turning of keys to unlock the door to the mess that they'd gotten trapped in. But at the same time, everyone knew enough not to blame her senselessly. How was she to know that the goddess of fortune, the one that their house had been following for so long, would betray her so suddenly? Seeing Astoria not speak a word, Hermione quickly stepped in. "Don't worry about it, Astoria, who knows? It might be a blessing in disguise." Hermione wasn't trying to lie. In fact, she hoped that given what she knew about Mr. Error, that he wouldn't just discard them like pawns. Perhaps this was just his way of keeping any suspicion away from her as she proselytized everyone in the club with knowledge regarding his spells under the guise of needing to obey his orders. Astoria looked up at Hermione, her eyes hollow as if she hated Hermione for lying to her, but Hermione remained steadfast as she matched her gaze like steel. AN Patreon chapters are so much longer right now, makes me feel a little terrible for you guys slogging through these. I'll try posting as many as fast as I can in the next few days so that you're on the same page. I'm serious. To have gotten off from there without a scratch, I'm sure you also know that it's nearly miraculous. For a true God to let us be means that he truly sees something in all of us that he thinks deserves his attention. What if he just sacrifices us for some strange ritual? Hermione shook her head as Cedric stepped in to give Astoria more confidence by showing her that he supported her too. If he wanted us dead, he would have just captured us. Not sent us back. If he truly wanted to sacrifice someone, he could have just picked anyone from Nocturne Alley, plenty of wizards there at whose disappearance no one would even blink an eye at. Harry nodded and stepped forward too. And, if he just wanted to control us, I'm sure he could have done something worse. Why give us free will? If we humans can cast the Imperious Curse, what's stopping him from doing the same? Or even something worse? Astoria gulped. Everyone's arguments seemed perfectly logical. Logical only as long as the true god they were dealing with didn't just want to have some fun by seeing them writhe in agony as the situations around them tortured them. Everyone knew this point and had strayed away from it deliberately. Except Astoria wasn't so easy to fool. She was a Slytherin and cunning flowed in her veins. She could easily see what they were all trying to do. And so, Astoria turned towards Loki. But unlike what everyone expected, for Loki to give up and feel scared for himself, he smiled. It gave a sense of deceit and threat, leaving them all to wonder if he was going to lie just like them. Tisk. Seriously. You guys are too impatient. Loki said with a smile. Huh, what do you mean? Astoria asked, her voice croaking. Loki grabbed Hermione's hands as he pulled the small piece of paper that he'd just given her. Hermione only read one side of the paper, Loki said, showing the side Hermione read. On it were the words, I accept your payment, all of you. It conveyed the meaning in a simple sentence. Just as everyone was confused about what Loki meant by it, Cedric's eyes widened, his sharp eyes spotting what Loki was leading onto. Loki noticed it and nodded in Cedric's direction. You're right, there's something else on the back too. Loki flipped the page with a simple twirl of his fingers and on its back was something else. You may use Hogwarts as you please without anyone being able to peek. The sudden surprise that there was text on the other side of the paper did surprise everyone a little, but Harry and Hermione soon frowned as they stood confused about what it meant. What does it mean? Harry voiced his confusion for both of them. Of course. Cedric laughed. His laugh was too weak, clearly an attempt at trying to uplift his spirits but failing because the trauma of their most experience still lingered. Harry and Hermione turned towards Cedric and he explained calmly. The bargain was never about our lives as we believed it to be, Cedric said, and that was enough for Hermione to get it as her eyes widened as she slammed her hand into her forehead with a smack. How did I miss this? Hermione cursed at herself, causing Harry to look at her with confusion before he looked at everyone else, as they seemed to have caught onto what was going on. Astoria was surprisingly the person to speak up this time. It means that he never intended to take our lives. If I understand correctly, that was just our misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Harry asked, still confused, but Astoria had shut up, her lips thin as she looked at Loki, who nodded and continued. Yes. Mr. Error started off our bargain by saying I work on the principle of equivalent exchange. And since we were talking about leaving alive, we assumed that it was our lives that we were talking about. Loki explained and paused to see if Harry understood what was going on. So it wasn't our lives. What did we get beat? I mean fight for them? Harry asked, bewildered. Loki smiled as he spoke again. The note just revealed it, didn't it? Loki said, pointing at one particular word on the note. Hogwarts. Something suddenly clicked in Harry's mind as he nearly exclaimed. He was only bargaining with us for our rights to use it. Doesn't this mean he owns Hogwarts? Loki just shrugged casually and nodded. That is what it would imply and is probably why Astoria's ritual had the effect it did. What true god would decide to mess with the domain of another? Harry sighed in exhaustion as a wave of relief passed through his entire body. His shoulders slumped, just as did everyone else's as they all fell to the floor. They rested in silence for a few seconds before Cedric, who desperately needed a distraction, turned to Loki. How did you even hide yourself? I never heard a single noise. The disillusionment charm doesn't stop sound from spreading out, does it? Another modified spell. Cedric didn't truly mean to intrude on Loki's prowess with his spells, but just like everyone else he didn't want to be left alone with his thoughts after having had such a close brush with what he thought was certain death. And Loki naturally complied. It is a modified spell, but not the one you guessed. The disillusionment charm only stops your physical body from being seen. I made one that hides everything about you in the shadow dimension. Of course it has its flaws, which is why Luna could still see me. Loki bold. So the soul then? Cedric asked and Loki nodded softly, ending the conversation since he couldn't be bothered to be asked to display a spell which actually did that. As such, just as silence started to settle in once again, he let one of his runes reform the item it held. In front of everyone, a modest book flickered through the air as it dropped onto Hermione's head. Everyone looked at the book that had fallen onto the ground as their senses quickly read the title. A Compendium of Errors. Mr. World. Everyone's eyes widened, but Hermione was the most surprised, albeit for a different reason. I was right. Mr. Error has problems communicating with us. He's very shy, which is why he took the chance to help me out so much. Hermione was beyond overjoyed regardless of her shocked expression outwardly. Luna looked at Hermione with slight confusion but chalked it to Hermione simply being overjoyed that whatever had happened wasn't an attack. Is that what I think it is? Cedric asked with a wry smile, causing everyone to gulp. Could it be cursed? Astoria asked. There was a strange gleam in her eyes that reminded one of a greedy dragon. But Loki spoke. No. I don't see any curses on it from here. I would have to pick it up for further examina. But Hermione seemed to have a different mind. She immediately picked up the book without worry and flicked its pages open under everyone's surprised gaze. A sigh of relief left her as she said with a smile, "No curses." Harry was about to question her recklessness, but remembering just how fearlessly Hermione had acted while bargaining for their lives with Mr. Error held him back. Perhaps whatever had happened to Hermione was for the best after all. Thank you for reading. Mostly everyone held their breaths as they stared at the bold Hermione, waiting for something to happen. While everyone did expect something to happen to her, it wasn't as drastic as her falling over and starting to bleed from every orifice. Instead it was of the sort that made her stand out. Perhaps some blessing from Mr. Error himself. But nothing of the sort happened. At least nothing that they could see like before. But Hermione's eyes seemed to have widened as her pupils narrowed to display her focus. Harry, being the closest to Hermione apart from Loki, immediately noticed Hermione doing what he'd termed aptly, the thing, where she'd focus similarly when she'd noticed something interesting or important in a book. Cedric noticed the change not long after, and Astoria, along with Luna, did when Hermione's hands trembled slightly. Something wrong? Astoria asked once again, her self-blaming although stopped for now, hadn't left her alone yet. Something interesting in there, my own? Loki asked, trying hard to keep up his confused face as he knew Hermione was just leading people around since she'd read the gospel in her hands. Probably more than once. And knowing her, she'd probably already memorized the book enough to be able to recite it from right to left while it was being held upside down in a mirror. Her acting skills. When did they improve so much? Where did my innocent little Miss Magician go? Although Loki was jovial, the question he asked was answered by his own mind by a thought that he did his best to ignore. Loki knew exactly why Hermione had improved so much. It was likely to be able to pretend about being a devout believer of Mr. Error in front of everyone she wanted to convert to become his believer, so that she could revive Daphne after earning credit points from him in the Tarot Club. Leaving the problems such clever acting produced on Hermione's Beander journey, which Loki was sure he'd have to use the Beander characteristics from Umbridge to cure aside, Loki scanned every other member in the hall. Cedric looked like he'd been through much but was going to keep trudging through. Harry looked ready to fight whatever was about to come up, while Astoria and Luna did their best to prep themselves for another big revelation. And Hermione didn't disappoint. The book is a gospel. But that's not the important part. Hermione said, her tone careful and perfectly crafted to show her vulnerability. It really felt like Hermione had discovered forbidden knowledge. Enough that Loki could see it affect the colorful representations of emotions in her astral body. It was clear to him that Hermione had practiced this through and through, multiple times, enough times that she could do this in her sleep. That's not the important part. Astoria prompted, picking up on the thread of curiosity that Hermione had left for her to unravel. Hermione nodded, then gulped audibly before speaking again. The book has spells, spells that will probably cause a lot of chaos in the real world if anyone gets word of them. Really? Harry asked, a little unconvinced. Hermione locked eyes with him and then spoke with a sigh. One of them can disarm a person without them realizing it. Hermione paused as she let the words sink in, and as she did, everyone realized that none of them truly found it dangerous. But Hermione wasn't done. If I'm not wrong, the spell can also steal your thoughts. When combined with the next spell that helps you create illusions, which can also make illusory thoughts to confound others, it can give you the ability to control people without them ever realizing such a thing had even occurred. There was an extended silence in the room that both Loki and Hermione let simmer, bringing everyone to the realization that they had been given a spell that could essentially be classified in a category similar to the Imperious Curse, and unforgivable. Especially when the effects of the spell couldn't even be detected, just like its unforgivable counterpart. Everyone shivered. Cedric was the first to snap himself out of it as he, along with Harry, moved closer to Hermione to look at the page she was holding. It didn't take them long after that to sigh out audibly, which prompted Astoria to ask them a question. What happened? Why do you look so relieved? Harry answered for both of them. The spell's a lot more complicated than Hermione's simple explanation. It requires us to learn how to weave our spirituality into completely new patterns that are different from the standard set of spells for starters, and even then. The spell is of the kind that requires you to sustain your intent for the entire duration, unlike the easy elemental spells. If I had to compare it to something, it would be the Patronus charm, where you constantly have to keep happy thoughts in your mind. Astoria's eyes shrank, but she still seemed undeterred. That's still reckless. I'm sure a lot of people won't give up the opportunity to get them into their reflexes. You should know that, given you told me that you've been to Nocturne Alley, a place where each Tom, Dumb, and Harry, no offense, knows how to cast the unforgivables, spells that aren't really supposed to be easy to cast. Cedric nodded and carried on the conversation from there. It is. But we have a unique advantage. What would that be? Astoria asked with a frown, not really seeing the supposed advantage. Even Hermione, Harry and Luna looked at him since they hadn't noticed any true advantage. Does he mean that we can keep ourselves safe because we have access to the spells earlier? Hermione thought to herself. Cedric looked back at the spells in the book as if confirming something, and then nodded as he explained, if I'm right. I think that Mr. Error is not an evil god. Quote. Seeing the silence around him, Cedric smiled, since he understood that everyone here had the wisdom to not outright dispose of something simply because it avoided the norm, which in this case was that no one had ever heard of an error god before, and then elaborated his point. Being of the reader pathway, I've read a lot of books, and since my family's a noble, we've got a lot of them, if you know what I mean. Cedric said with a slight blush. Seeing this, everyone realized he was talking about books for dark magic, things that ranged all the way from simple cursed books that could turn you into a chicken if you touched it the wrong way, to books that directly invited an evil deity to take control over your body. Given that I've read such books, I know exactly how plenty of dark magic that points to evil deities area structured. Each magic that is constructed in such a way requires a sacrifice of either a body or a mind. And Mr. Error's magic is clean, almost too pure and perfect for it to be from an evil god. To the extent that I'd even reluctantly believe someone if they told me that they discovered these spells in the tomb of an ancient wizard like Merlin. I'd believe that these spells have always been part of the world. Although Cedric's words brought them some peace regarding the fact that they wouldn't be losing their sanity for as long as they used such overpowered spells, Astoria doubled down on her question, which everyone had. And how does this become an advantage for us? Cedric took one last look at the page of the book that Hermione had opened up and spoke softly. I believe that some version of the finite incantatum charm should work perfectly as a counter to this new magic. I don't believe the counter curse will be any simpler given the complexity of what I'm seeing, but it should be enough so that these spells aren't classified as unforgivables if we can develop such a charm before the spells eventually make their way out into the public. There was a momentary joy in everyone's hearts before they all frowned with sadness at the same time. And Cedric nodded in acknowledgement. Yes, I know how ridiculous that sounds, making a counter spell for the very god whose slaves we are, but I believe we can convince him. As long as his aim is to let the word about him spread around for whatever reason, having a spell that has a known counter curse will cause more people to try and learn them. If Loki wasn't among the group inside the room of requirements right now, he would have burst out laughing. This was precisely his aim when he'd started his plan to conquer the world using his spells and gospel. One of the reasons Loki hadn't spent time releasing a counter curse even though he had one, since he had already created one to effectively test the spell on his test subjects without harming them, as he didn't have hundreds of willing test subjects just lying around the corner, was because he wanted to give the world a little shock because of the new spell, so that, important, people would start working on the counter curse, which would give it a small boost in popularity since it would then be delegated the title of being a useful spell instead of a dangerous spell. He was banking on the fact that most witches and wizards would love learning some spell that has some current historical significance. But there was another tremendously important reason. And this reason was also why Loki had spent several weeks preparing to launch the gospel bundled up together with the spells. An anchor to a god didn't just sustain their humanity, but it also formed a corruption that allowed them to control the deity's personality. If Loki truly gave off the aura of an evil and imposing authoritarian, he would have been morphed to become it as long as he didn't advance quickly enough to make his own avatars his believers. As such, Loki was aiming for a kind and intelligent disposition, one that was vague enough that it would allow for several interpretations while also leaving enough room for him to mold his personality as he saw it fit and not the other way around. Of course, this would give him the constraint of appearing kind to a small degree. But it was rather that than risking losing his humanity entirely at any moment. As such, Loki wanted to congratulate Cedric, who had seen through his ploy well enough to have deduced the underlying foundation stones of his plan, but he couldn't do so directly, so he instead decided to give Cedric a gift when it was possible. Perhaps giving him a chance at making a small wish once he develops a counter curse for my spells would be a nice present, since it would help in spreading the spell. As Loki was lost in thoughts, Cedric paused and looked at Luna with a slightly confused expression as he formulated his thoughts in a nice way. Miss Lovegood, how did you know that this place was the residence of a true god? Everyone looked at Luna at that question. Even Loki, since he'd become startled at this new information, wondering if Luna knew the secret answer to the question, which essentially asked about the true essence of what the room of requirements actually was. Especially even though he'd kept it hidden from her the first time he'd brought her to the room. Did Helena tell her? Loki reasoned but quickly shook away the thought. No, she is not of the sort to go around babbling to people. But as his thoughts trailed to a conclusion, his mind pushed back with the simple scene nearly a year ago when Loki had seen Luna with Helena standing by the only window on the 7th floor. Are they close? Wait a second, now that I think about it, assuming that they met each other around that time for the first time, Helena still didn't have her mother back, and Luna's mother too. Sigh, how complicated. Suddenly Loki didn't feel very safe about his secrets anymore. He'd always made sure to keep people at an arm's length from himself. He made sure to only show the sides of himself that were required in that particular situation. And so while no single person could decode his entire mysterious persona, simply piecing the puzzle together by helping each other would reveal almost everything about him if he wasn't careful. How much did Helena tell Luna? Did she tell her about the founders and their crystals? Or did she even tell her that I helped them come back? Yeah, what did you even actually mean by that? Hermione asked with a forbidding sense of curiosity as she looked at Luna with some intrigue. With everyone staring at her, Luna didn't disappoint. The Waxperts don't like to come to this room. They say they are afraid of being burdened by revelations. Given that only Hermione, aside from Loki, knew that Luna's Waxperts weren't fairy tales, Only she realized that given the creatures could carry thoughts away from people's minds, the simple creatures were afraid of coming in contact with knowledge that could lead to their corruption. Something that one would only worry about if they were a high-sequence Beander or a true god. And the mystery of the person's identity wasn't left undisclosed, since the identity had taken the initiative to reveal it themselves. As Mr. Error had shown his ownership over the castle through his simple note, Hermione quickly realized that the Waxperts were likely avoiding him. But everyone else just remained confused. Waxperts? Cedric asked, not particularly recalling the mention of such creatures in any books he'd read, at least until he faintly remembered the Quibbler mentioning them. Those ethereal creatures that steal our thoughts and intentions. Ones that love gossip. Luna nodded. Cedric's thoughts fired in a similar fashion to Hermione as he too concluded that Mr. Error was likely the reason that the creatures avoided this room. Cedric wasn't sure that, if Mr. Error hadn't told them that he was only taking payment for them using his room, he'd even feel inclined to come back to this place after learning that Luna was right. It was scary and frankly a little unsettling that the school that was a key pillar of what was essentially modern magic was run on borrowed grounds. It made him question his knowledge about the founders and also any other great wizards that might have come along the way and passed through here. But since it was all a bit too much to think about right now, Cedric put it on the back burner, opting to think about all of this sometime later when he could sink himself in the comfortable headboy private bathroom during a bubble bath. With the simple questioning done, everyone relaxed once again, and after a few minutes of silence it was Hermione that spoke up. Let's take a break for today. I'll leave the book right here in this room so that it can stay here for whenever one of us needs to read it for as long as we're free. Hermione's gaze swept through for anyone to reject her idea, but no one did since they all found it reasonable. And with that everyone left the room of requirements together, walking away towards their dorms as they mulled on the nature of the incident they had become involved in. Harry and Hermione left together since they needed to go to the Gryffindor Tower, while Loki, Astoria, Cedric and Luna all moved down the castle stairs together. Their walk back was mostly silent, except Luna constantly giving Loki a deep look as she openly scanned him from head to toe. But since Loki said nothing, everyone else didn't interrupt Luna in her medical exam. Luna was also the first to split up towards the Ravenclaw Tower after Loki simply flicked his wand. Cedric and Astoria were confused again, but since Luna didn't say anything this time they said nothing again, even though they recognized that Loki had cast a tracking charm on her. Continuing their descent, Loki picked up his pace as he stepped into rhythm with Cedric's pace. Cedric, I had a question. Cedric gave Loki a side eye, smiled a little and then laughed while responding, I do too, we all do, don't we? Loki nodded with a smile and after a short pause asked his question, are you guys protecting the doors at the Department of Mysteries too? Cedric's smile faltered for a moment before he shook his head, I'm not supposed to say this to anyone, but, no. We aren't part of the same task force. We work on the other side of the door you guys guard. Loki's pupils narrowed. The other side, so you know what's there. Cedric shook his head. No, it isn't possible to know anything about that place. Not just because I don't have any memories regarding it, but any divinations regarding it fail in the worst possible ways. I know several nobles who've tried using mystical items to pry into fate to look at it all, but none of them have worked. They've all also mysteriously vanished, become a mystery of their own in the process. I see. Cedric then paused for a second as he sent Loki a passing glance before speaking in a whisper, as if he were revealing a secret, I've heard that the headmaster knows what's inside it. Loki's eyes widened slightly. That makes sense, but, thank you for letting me know about it. Cedric nodded and quickly stopped at the fork in their paths, I'm off to the Hufflepuff dorms now. I hope you're able to sleep tonight. Well, but given that you're part of the Black family now, do you also stay awake throughout the night like them? Knowing Cedric was just joking with him, Loki laughed a little before teasing Cedric instead, and what about you? I remember seeing you holding your wand and trembling, you sure you'll be able to close your eyes without holding another Hufflepuff in your room? Cedric's gaze turned hollow for a second as he remembered the fright of the night before. He deadpanned while shaking his head and laughing as he turned around waving his hand. Very funny, Loki. With Cedric gone, Loki kept walking alone until Astoria manned up enough to grab his hand. Loki, however, still remained silent. If the person beside him was Elaine, Loki wouldn't have been able to keep quiet for a second, wanting to hold and pamper her to the best of his wishes. But Loki also knew how best to comfort Astoria. He knew talking to her would only make her question things more, something which he couldn't encourage given the situation at hand as it involved deities and possibly outer gods themselves. But Astoria was too curious already. Something had happened to her during the ritual that she hadn't shared with anyone yet. Something which had created a burning ember of curiosity within her. As such, Astoria asked the question that had been on her mind ever since. I felt closer to Daphne when the ritual occurred. Astoria mumbled, and as she did, she felt Loki's hands tighten around her for a moment, but he remained silent. Astoria looked at Loki to gauge his reaction, but Loki had already closed his eyes as he began to ponder about what Astoria had just said while walking with her aide. That thing I guessed about. Could Daphne be connected to it in some way? But is what I guess really the truth? Single quote. I don't think I can really even divine about it if that is actually the truth. It's also probably why the goddess of fortune has survived all throughout the history of men, and God. But that still doesn't explain Daphne. As Loki walked while being guided through the dungeons by Astoria, they stopped when they arrived at the wall to the Slytherin common room. Do you know the password for this week? Astoria asked Loki as she clipped his nails with her own. Loki nodded. Rainbow cat, he said calmly while trying to contain his smirk. Astoria was about to laugh, but her eyes widened when the wall soundlessly slid open. Loki's eyes were still closed, as if he hadn't just pulled off what was possibly the biggest magic of the century, causing Astoria to stare at him as if he'd just grown a new head. But Loki didn't explain. Instead, he just pulled Astoria along with him to the common hall where he finally opened his eyes. I have some theories as to what it might be, but I'm not sure, yet. Loki said. Astoria tuned into Loki's serious gaze and nodded with understanding herself before giving a look filled with self-pity as she complained while looking at her feet. You're the only one that believes me, you know, not even Mum and Dad. Things aren't very nice at home anymore. Mum and Dad argue a lot. I don't think they even talk to each other anymore. They send me their own letters and rarely know what I'm talking about if I don't tell both of them about it firsthand. Loki smiled as he brushed Astoria's hair as he spoke in a warm tone. Do you know what's the problem, Tori? Astoria, still looking at her feet, shook her head. It's simple, there's someone important missing from their life. Astoria froze and then trembled as she spoke with fragility. But, sniffle, but I can't be as good as her. Sob, I can't be like Daph. Astoria said, but Loki gently patted her head. Isn't that what's missing in all of this? Loki asked. In Loki's mind the problem was simple. Could two people who could divine so many things so easily have easily let their burdened daughter know that they were fighting? Loki hadn't seen or heard much about Mr. Greengrass or even Mrs. Greengrass, but from what little he'd heard about them from Daphne and Astoria, they seemed to greatly care about their children. As such, it didn't take much mental power for Loki to decrypt Astoria's puzzling situation. The Greengrass were trying to bring back Astoria to her usual self. They no longer wanted to see her trying to fill Daphne's shoes and burning herself out. The first clue regarding this was that Astoria's mother had allowed Astoria's no doubt uncouth letter to be sent to the Malfoys as response to their marriage proposal. It meant that Mrs. Greengrass was ready to let her daughter vent even though it could harm their family's reputation. Secondly, Loki could see just how unhappy Astoria was with all around her. She wasn't the same jovial person she used to be. Every topic that she thought about would remind her of Daphne, and every little joke was related to her death in some twisted way. What was once a method of creative outlet for Astoria, her ability to gossip about anything, had slowly turned into a trap for herself. As such, Loki pulled Astoria's chin up and spoke while looking into her eyes. No, Tori. Daphne isn't missing from their lives. She isn't in a place where you can find her anymore. Quote. Question mark quote. Confused Astoria matched Loki's gaze. Teardrops shimmered at the edge of her eyes as she asked, then, who? Loki smiled as he wiped away the tears threatening to leak from the corner of her eyes as he explained, it's you. You're missing. Even though you're with them, you're still left behind, somewhere where only pain lies. Ah. Once Astoria was off to her room in the girls' side of the Slytherin dormitory, Loki walked back out of the dungeons as he followed the signal of his trace that he'd left on Luna. It didn't take long for Loki to reappear into the Ravenclaw dormitory after he used the same trick to open it as he did with the Slytherin common room's door. Loki simply confounded the magical door into believing that he'd already given it the answer it needed no matter what he said. The method to confound the doors was currently very complicated because none of the founders had skimped out on protecting the dormitories from anyone entering them to threaten those inside. As such, it was ridiculously hard to open even the Slytherin common room door with a fake password and normal magic, if it were even possible, since Loki guessed that not even Dumbledore himself could do it without bringing out his headmaster privilege or using some meander means to bypass the door itself. Loki opened the Slytherin common room door to entertain Astoria by manipulating the runes inside it by parasitizing it using his worms so that he could make them tameable enough that they'd open anytime he was present regardless of what he said. Loki should have discovered this ability long ago, given that his senses as a marauder kept informing him that he could very easily escape from even rooms with locked doors. But it wasn't the first idea that had popped into his head. Loki assumed that his intuition informed him of such a possibility because he could use the sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit meander characteristics to deceive the door. Yet, the intuitive observation remained even after he'd used the meander characteristic to keep Tom safe in the astral world. As such, Loki began to seriously examine the effect. At first he assumed it might have been the meander characteristic before, but it could now refer to his ability to control spirit body threads since the door, although an inanimate item, had spirit body threads of its own. Loki assumed that he could simply control the threads to get the door to open whenever he wanted. But the castle was protected against being controlled should one attempt at doing such a thing. How did they do it? According to Rowena, they gave the castle a consciousness with the help of Mr. Error and directly left the defense regarding this aspect to this consciousness, which could hide itself inside the castle and use its better judgment to stop malicious attempts at bypassing its security in this manner. So as long as one did not have direct access to this consciousness, it would mean that you couldn't really fool it directly. So Loki relied on his understanding of Rowena's runic knowledge and skill that he gleaned from studying the Room of Requirements to quickly and effortlessly parasitize the runic circuits of the doors of the castle itself, since they were a sort of pseudo-mystical item. As such, Loki could easily enter and exit any dorm at Hogwarts at his will. But entering the Ravenclaw girls' dormitory, Loki felt slight resistance from a few of the runes in the door and smiled. So it still detected that I'm not here for pleasant business. Loki thought as he used the Worm of Time parasitizing the door to put more pressure on it to open for him. Once the door opened, Loki walked straight up to Luna's room where the girl in question was already asleep. Loki watched her for a few seconds to make sure that she wasn't awake and wasn't going to stop what he did next. Loki quickly used the dreams of a girl to get her to answer what they'd done to Luna's shoes by manipulating her sea of subconscious. And the answer left him surprised but also a little frustrated. They tossed it into the Black Lake and weighed them down with stones while tying them in nets so that they couldn't be summoned using the Accio charm, even if Luna somehow managed to picture the underwater scene around it perfectly. Cruel, Loki whispered, but his face sported a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Loki proceeded to sit by the window, staring at the Black Lake lit in the deep nightly hue of the moon hung in the sky as he contemplated what he would do to the Nargles, troubling Luna. Loki watched the 4 other girls in the room, sleeping, as a devious idea emerged into his mind. They will serve as perfect teaching aids. Loki walked up to each girl sleeping in their beds as he snapped his fingers to create a crisp sound as he stole something from each of them. Before he left, however, Loki divined the location of the shoes and summoned them back to Luna's side by simply stealing them from their position at the bottom of the lake, without any water or nets bogging them down, of course. But just as Loki finished his theft, he frowned when he noticed something strange. Loki lost his control over the gray fog for a moment as it moved to the edge of his theft, hiding the act of stealing for some reason. It spooked him for a second, but he managed to calm down when the gray fog did nothing else. Loki remained frozen in place for a few seconds as he analyzed what had just happened. The gray fog moved on its own. Goddess of Fortune. No, it can't be her. I would have felt her gaze over me. And I didn't feel myself losing control over the gray fog. No, it felt more like a coincidence that the fog just slipped in to cover my theft. Could it have been done by my subconscious to protect me? From what? Loki's brows furrowed, since the only answers were probably all too dangerous for him to explore freely outside the mysterious castle above the gray fog itself. Is there an outer deity living inside the lake or something? Loki's frown only deepened before he vanished from Luna's room, leaving behind no trace of his presence as he teleported back to the room of requirements to quickly check his theories. Hermione and Harry sat in the common room of Gryffindor as they discussed the events that they'd been through tonight. Are you sure, Harry? Hermione asked with a soft frown. Is it a bad idea? Harry asked back. Hermione sighed mentally, knowing that she couldn't reveal to Harry just who Dumbledore really was. And remembering that he could know everything about you if you simply spoke his name out loud or even thought about it, Hermione wasn't very eager to discuss him. As such, she explained using fear. What if Mr. Error does something? I trust Dumbledore's skill. Hermione nodded but provided a counterpoint. What do you think will happen if he uses the lives of all the other students who signed the contract as leverage? What if he kills some of them, like me, just because you talked to him? Harry fell into thought as he nodded. So we need to figure out how to get out of that contract then. Hermione nodded but then spoke once again with a sad frown. That will not be easy. A saint notarized the contract, so it won't be easy to solve the problem without suffering permanent damage. And that's leaving behind Mr. Error's modifications. Harry nodded with furrowed brows as he spoke out the meaning hidden in Hermione's words, so I have to at least be a saint to break free. Hermione shrugged and slowly nodded to show her helplessness. She wanted Harry to grow strong enough that he wouldn't be stuck being a pawn in the hands of an old deity that had remained past its time. This chapter is not very good. But fear not. Things will get better from here. The chapters will also slowly get longer from here. Only a little at first, but soon roughly about 4 or sometimes 5 times the word count. With one of his tasks for the night done, Loki stepped out of the Ravenclaw common room and made his way back to the room of requirements. Once inside the place, Loki sat down and started sipping on tea as he diverted his thoughts from wandering by reading his notes on magic that he had created based on Rowena's suggestions. But with everything that had happened today, occasional tremors rocked his focus, not letting him study much of anything until he heard a short buzz emerge from the pocket watch around his waist. Loki pulled out his pocket watch and became confused. I never set up an alarm for 1 a.m. in the night. Oh, could it be? Loki's eyes widened as he quickly stepped away from the area and tracked his connection into the astral world through the gray fog he'd left behind to hide the place where he'd started the ritual for pleasing demons. Loki had kept checking on the location every few days and found that his barriers were indeed being pushed to the limits, since Tom had tried multiple ways to escape and even kill himself because he knew whatever Loki had planned for him wasn't going to be much of a paradise at this point. In fact, after the first few times Tom managed to escape from Loki and his illusions, Tom realized that each time he would find himself missing Loki before he eventually walked back to Loki to be imprisoned once again. Although Tom never realized that those were illusions, since Loki had worked very hard to make them as realistic as possible by involving as many illusory spirit threads as possible so that Tom would actually feel hints of dangers through his danger premonition. It was a naive system that initially had several loopholes that Tom almost always exploited, but the system was never meant to defeat Tom in the first place. It was only meant to delay him until Loki finally arrived and used the Sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit Beander characteristic to steal all his memories and intentions of doing such a thing. After the month of studying spirit body threads from Helga Hufflepuff's crystal and during his job at the Department of Mysteries, Loki had a decent grasp of how he could manipulate them. And so, Loki was deeply tempted to simply make Tom a marionette. Not like it would be as strong as even an actual Sequence 5 marionette, or even take less time to execute it for him, since he wasn't as good at controlling the threads that emerged out of other people yet. But given Tom's almost mundane state of constant torture, where the only release was Tom losing most of his memories after each time he got caught, Loki could still easily turn him into a marionette. Yet, Loki remained on the fence about it, firstly because he didn't know what effect it would have on the ritual to contact the demons, and secondly because Tom was of the Abyss pathway, so being so deeply connected to someone of her domain wasn't something he was keen on doing, especially when it could lead her to flip the tables on him instead, after he'd angered the her last time they met. Loki's body entered the astral world and floated directly to the spot that he'd left his mark using the gray fog, stopping right beside Tom, who was cocooned in gray fog. A stray thought emerged in Loki's mind as he studied the gray fog. Can the fate goddess also sense this place then? Loki frowned when he thought this far. No, she shouldn't have such deep control for now. Loki shook his head and pushed the thoughts away to focus on the final steps of the ritual that had taken the majority of his time until now. Slowly but steadily, Loki started to unravel the gray fog threaded into the space around the ritual area and pushed it all back through his connection to the castle. Loki wouldn't have been able to do this normally without being a Sequence 3 himself, but since he was already dismantling the ritual, Loki could freely use the Sequence 3 Beander characteristics that had been keeping Tom busy. And as such, Loki was able to use his Sequence 3 Beander characteristics to trick his connection to the castle and strengthen it enough for him to be able to let the gray fog return to the castle instead of polluting the spirit world. As Loki carefully unraveled everything, he made sure to observe every single ripple his actions produced, since a single action that was not covered up properly could alert almost every angel and true god that might be interested. It was a terribly slow process, but Loki managed to hide everything. Or so he thought. As soon as Loki's fingers twitched one final time to stop the maddened Tom, who had been forcefully fed the potion of a Sequence 3 blatherer from acting out and causing a calamity, Loki noticed something strange. It was a dimming ethereal feeling, as if he were falling asleep, loose and unguarded, but it was also something he'd expected. Everything around the area suddenly fell into a strange lulling silence. It was almost as if the quiet of the night had settled into the current region of the spirit world. Loki almost sighed audibly, but managed to keep it inside his mind. Almost immediately, a strong gaze passed over Loki's position in the spirit world as he started to feel an immense need to fall asleep right where he was standing. Normally, Loki would have forced himself to keep awake, knowing that taking so much as a nap while unguarded inside the spirit world would have grave consequences in such a situation where someone was clearly attacking him. But just this once, Loki gave into the feeling and fell asleep. Almost as soon as he did, Loki found himself surrounded by a deep darkness that tried working its way up into his mind. Loki could have tried to stop the probe from entering his mind, but he had already guessed that doing so would have been near impossible without the help of the gray fog or the Saphira castle directly. Before long, the gaze on Loki turned into a presence that he could distinctly feel was right in front of him. But Loki kept his eyes shut, even going as far as to steal his vision so that he couldn't see a thing. Not that he would have, since the presence that had manifested around him had the form of pure darkness. Loki stood limp, as if he were a puppet whose strings were cut. A bout of madness struck Loki as knowledge about strange things started to fill his mind. Knowledge that Loki did his best to steal, yet the bombardment kept dragging him to insanity as he learnt and unlearned information about the horrors of the world. In one moment, Loki remembered an entirely new lifetime he had never lived. He was Jack, a beggar on the streets of London, waiting behind theatres, tracking carriages, following them in their shadows before lulling the fair maiden inside and consuming her blood. In the next moment, Loki forgot everything there was to learn about it. Next, Loki remembered being a thick whale, drifting endlessly alongside his companions, his friends that had drifted along with him since childhood, his eye candy whom he was about to pursue at the encouragement of his friends, his little brother, who always annoyed him, to help get rid of barnacles stuck under his chin. Everything went swimmingly. But it all came crashing down one day when their school was targeted by a horror well beyond their comprehension, falling into the trap where he was captured, strung up on hooks, just to be tormented until he vomited before the sweet release of death consumed him. Then he was a simple boy. A simple boy who could turn into a demon at will. Then he was a lazy dog, even rain couldn't move it from its spot until finally, when one day its owner. Then he was. Loki's mind was struggling, pretending to be asleep while letting the gray fog work to steal and protect his sense of self and identity from being purged by the power of a true god was hell. Loki didn't know what the being in front of him wanted to do. But he kept at it. Was it some cruel joke? An amused being playing with a toy, perhaps. Maybe it was to see how soon he would break. Maybe it was to see if he would break at all. Loki's continuously mutating body kept dissolving itself into darkness before the darkness born out of an unknowable void reformed into him. It made him look distinctly like an error in existence itself, making him become an amalgamation of holes into the void mixed with flesh and blood. Anyone looking at such a creature would definitely be marveled by the resilience and commitment to sanity it showed while being tortured without release. Loki, meanwhile, felt no such thing. All he felt was pain. Endless pain. Just as Loki felt his head was about to explode because of everything happening inside him, a thundering voice rolled out of the void of darkness around him. It was as if the darkness itself had spoken. Tell me, boy, do you wish to be revived when you face death after he revives in you? Loki said nothing for a few seconds as his brain processed the question he'd be asked. Awfully brave of him to assume that I'm going to die anytime soon. Loki responded dazedly as his hollow eyes gazed at the darkness that stared deep into him. My life and death serve one purpose, the resurrection of the great Lord. Although such a sleepy person wouldn't have been able to remain so expressive, Loki did his best to push emotion into his bland tone to show just how much he cared about Mr. Error. The darkness pulsed at his answer, seemingly pleased by his loyal obedience. It left Loki feeling confused. Can he not sense the Saphira castle on me? If he can and just hasn't commented about it yet. How is he so sure that I'm not Mr. Error already? How is he even sure that I am affected by his ability to drag me into a dream? If he can sense the Saphira castle on me. Loki almost frowned as he thought this. While he himself didn't have any memories regarding meeting or even helping Salazar Slytherin, from the books written about him in the Room of Requirements, he did feel that being so close to a true god should have invoked some spiritual intuition alarms. It felt weird to Loki that Salazar was so sure that Mr. Error and he were different people. But Loki didn't question it for now. His idea about it all was that even though Salazar could probably sense some spiritual significance from Loki, he just assumed that it was because Loki was the resurrection vessel of Mr. Error. The silence lingered a moment longer as the darkness seemed to revel in Loki's devoted answer. Loki could almost feel the darkness radiating a deep sense of excitement. Is he acting so unabashedly worshipful of another god right now because he thinks that I won't remember any of this? Time seemed to pass as Loki eventually grew tired of playing the part of being asleep in front of a true god. And as if noticing Loki's impatience, the darkness spoke once again after making sure its influence on him lessened enough to keep him lucid. Boy, what is your answer to the question Rowena's daughter posed to you? Loki frowned mentally. Shouldn't you treat me with more respect if you think that I'm the vessel of your idol's reincarnation? Why do you call me a boy? I've got a name, you yandere snake. I'll make sure to torture teach you extra well once I return. Not wanting to break the illusion of his consciousness though, Loki answered what he'd already planned to say. This was the greatest opportunity he could get to digest his parasite potion apart from the grand experiment he was going to perform in the coming months with magic. And as such, Loki wanted to miss none of it. Not one bit. Loki's head swung loosely as his eyes settled on the darkness that had snuggly wrapped around him like a blanket of space, engulfing him in it as if he were a puppet held together by the whims and fancies of its master. I agree, Loki said without fear, as if his true thoughts were slipping out because of the lack of control. Goo. In exchange I want to be directed to find the sequence 2 Beander characteristic necessary for my advancement. The darkness trembled as if greatly shocked, but Loki didn't give his fan to ask him any questions. Instead he kept rambling, oversharing, as if he were a fervent fan, too. I don't want to keep Mr. Error waiting any longer. Mr. Error has gone above and beyond to help me out, by keeping my sister safe and sound. I can only repay him best by giving him myself. My body. My soul. My whole. Loki declared with surprising firmness in his tone, as if simply evoking Mr. Error's name had given him the strength to break free from a true god's control. It greatly surprised even the darkness as it grew silent for a few seconds before. I understand. Loki stayed still after that as he felt the darkness shift around him. It felt like the darkness was trying to shine some light onto itself to search for something in particular as its body hustled around like sheets in the wind. After a few moments of rustling, Loki finally felt a tendril of darkness slip out of the mass, the body of the true god he was just communicating with. It slithered around him before sinking into his astral body from over his shoulder, sinking slowly like a container losing its air as heavy weights dragged it to the ocean floor. Loki was surprised, startled and bamboozled. He had expected to be told where the Beander characteristics were, not whatever this was. It felt weird to be violated by a tentacle after all. Did I teach him about it in the past? Would suit the theme of a nightmare. Loki asked himself, feeling like he'd done this to himself in some way, like he'd played himself. Within moments, Loki realized what Salazar was doing. The tendril of darkness touched Loki's soul and marked it with a will. It didn't seem strong enough to host the true god on his being directly, but it was enough to interfere with his fated actions, perhaps an attempt at guiding him to the required location. Loki didn't understand why Salazar had done this, but his question was answered almost immediately. My will guide you to your destination, for I cannot reveal the current location without risking you to corruption. Salazar said calmly. Loki's body remained slack in spite of all that Salazar had said and done. There were plenty of thoughts in Loki's mind as his mind dissected and stitched together everything Salazar had said, but knowing better, he remained quiet for now. The darkness took a good look at him for the next few seconds as Loki felt a trace of pity flash in its being for him. But that pity was soon erased by excitement for something else. Your sacrifice has been accepted, you may visit the demons. Loki's vision shifted and almost immediately he found himself surrounded by a hostile abyss-like darkness. It wasn't quite the same as the abyssal feeling that he got from Mother Tree of Desire, but it was similar, as if the darkness had been morphed into something more dangerous, more ruthless. Gone was the unnoticed warmth of darkness from before as it was replaced by a biting cold that aimed to infiltrate into each cell of his body, trying to overpower him and turn him wonderful, almost immediately. Knowledge sank into his mind in the form of wails and screams as he failed to comprehend any of it, only knowing that listening to it would be for his best. Loki quickly regained his sight as he reabsorbed the rune he'd transformed after stealing it and continued to steal the corruption-inducing knowledge that he was being bombarded with right before his hand landed on one of the fleshy walls disguised as darkness surrounding him. With an annoyed frown, Loki spoke softly. Isn't being vetted by a true god enough? The words were effective since everything stopped almost immediately. Loki stepped on Tom, who was writhing under his feet. Loki already glanced at him, and looked at him in entirety, but apart from being trapped in a nightmare created by a true god, there wasn't much else to worry about for Tom. He'd surely go mad with fright from the nightmare, but then again, what Loki had done was arguably worse. The deep dark abyss that Loki was staring into suddenly grew eyes of various shapes and sizes, which peered back at Loki, examining him keenly as they looked for any signs of suspicion or deceit. While the eyes scanned Loki, his own eyes landed on the body that had turned into a massive blob of flesh right in front of him. The blob of flesh had mostly exploded with only its heart still hanging around as it continued to beat while pumping black blood out of the exposed veins and arteries. It occurred to Loki at that moment that Salazar Slytherin's purpose in questioning him wasn't just to judge his answers. It was likely that Salazar was just making sure that Loki would pay absolutely no attention to the outside world since Salazar had transported both him and Tom through the darkness into the location of the hidden demons. Loki frowned. In spite of all his preparations for being ready to have to face Salazar Slytherin's methods himself, Loki found that he'd been inadequately prepared since he couldn't orient himself using any means. He didn't know where he was or even how he was brought here. All he knew was that he was in his astral projection form and was somewhere in the spirit or astral world hidden by darkness. Maybe even in the kingdom of a divine god himself. But if he was in the shadow of a random electric pole in a suburban neighborhood or in the shadow of a cloud floating aimlessly over an ocean, Loki knew not. I can sense the Saphira Castle's connection with me, but that isn't much to orient myself to begin with since I don't know where the damn castle itself is in this world. After the abyssal creature's first attempt at terrorizing Loki by throwing the foul-looking demonic creature in front of him, Loki was snapped out of his thoughts when one of the pairs of floating eyes that looked to be a perpetual part of the dark abyss opened its toothy mouth, revealing a horde of spiky teeth that looked like they were ready to shred anyone near them into pieces. "Are you telling the truth, boy? You remember him questioning you, even though it happened in the darkness?" Loki shook his head. "You're thinking too much. I only made an educated guess based on what's in front of me. I remember being dragged away before falling asleep." The darkness seemed to pulse at his answer before it grew to absorb the spiky-faced demon into the collective unending depth of the abyssal darkness. As the peering eyes started to discuss with each other through gazes, Loki noticed a pair of eyes that he could have sworn were part of the same demon, which looked at each other too as if the eye on the left was consulting with the one on the right. Loki felt the attack on his body lessen slowly as he didn't need to steal away his corruption anymore. And almost immediately because of the reduced burden on his spirit and his mind, his instincts picked up something strange about the place he was in. "We heard from him that you chose to help him as payment." Loki smiled mentally. "They're quick, no time to waste for them. They're probably tired from waiting for so long to get their home back." "Yes, I did. And I hope you don't mind parting with a few precious things along the way to help me help you. After all, you want to go back, don't you?" Loki maintained a professional smile throughout, but when the demons didn't bother responding, he frowned. And since it seemed that they were waiting for him to do so, the creatures of the abyss spoke once again. "We don't need to go back." Loki's brows rose but a bit to express his surprise. "And why is that, if I might ask?" "We've integrated well enough into the society of the wizards and have changed our ways and methods to get what we want without being hunted down for it. Truth be told, you're more of an annoyance for us than anything." "I see." Loki nodded. "Did they really think I'm such a pushover? Did they think I don't realize that they're trying to get me to owe them a favor by begging them to help me since I've already agreed to Salazar Slytherin's request? How can a scammer scam the god of scammers without even praying to him first?" Loki observed the flesh bags hiding within the darkness carefully, trying to understand if he was being tricked or if there was some rationality to it all. Especially since his decryption abilities were ringing like a bell being rung on a shore after spotting pirates. A few genuinely want to remain here, while a few others want to swindle me. But the rest, they're acting like they truly need me for something. What could a group of demons isolated from the world, and protected by a true god need from a mere sequence for? Would there even be a reason for them to ask for my help instead of Salazar himself? And why do I get the sense that the worried ones are the stronger ones? Interesting. And after some quick thinking, Loki crafted a perfectly annoying frown on his face. Is that so? Loki said with some disappointment. The eyes in the abyss bobbed up and down ever so slightly following the movement of his head. I understand, Loki said, as he easily caught several of those eyes twitch in happiness when he said that, but Loki continued, since they were too weak to even cater to, then I'll have no choice but to ask my lord for help. Before any of the fleshbags even realized what was happening, a dense and alienating feeling of suppression left Loki. Gray fog manifested around Loki, rolling off his body like a geyser, as Loki manipulated his connection to the castle to draw more of it than he currently could with the help of the Sequence 3 Beander characteristic. You think you have a choice? Loki said with a tremble in his tone as it cracked randomly, his eyes already focused on something much further in the darkness, hidden as if cowering from something, or someone. There was silence for a few seconds as the demons looked bewildered at what was happening, moving away from Loki so as to avoid touching any of the gray fog that was pouring out of him. Their eyes immediately crashed to the ground, not daring to even so much as glance at him from their periphery. They couldn't possibly know what it was, but their instincts as demons screamed danger of the highest order, and so they unhesitatingly followed, even the strongest ones. Loki's robes aired out, the gray fog slithering around his body as it covered the right half of his face in a mysterious way, appearing as if hiding an entity far beyond comprehension speaking to their madness. That was when every single demon in the area felt it. A sickeningly sweet smell, an aroma they couldn't hope to resist. It was as if they'd been offered their greatest desire right in their mouths. For the very first time in a while, every single demon in the area, even those as strong as demigods, found themselves succumbing to a simple attack. Their eyes lulled as their vision blurred. Their flesh bags relaxed, and their minds calmed down. A simple corruption spilled into their minds from their subconscious. They felt pleasant. Loki, however, only gave them a single glance before his eyes landed in the darkness of the abyss and spoke in a cracked tone, "Out with it." The demons all slowly stretched out their hands and placed their sharp clawed fingers before their temples, ready to bore into it at the mention of a single word. As Loki had decrypted, it was clear to him that if the demons actually didn't want to move from this place, it meant one of two things, or even both at once. Either the demons really liked this place since it was guarded by Salazar Slytherin himself and kept separated from the real world so that no threats could harm them, making all of them into glorified bags of fleshy paperweights, not wanting to risk going out of their way to return the glory of their ancient elders. Or, the second option that occurred to Loki, which got his attention even more. A demon succumbing to emotions. Oh my, how far you've fallen, Farbati. Loki whispered, his voice and tone laced with desire so strong that it evoked feelings of dread and despair in the one hidden in the shadows. The eyes of every demon not fully drenched in desire, instantly widened at the mere mention of the name, as most suddenly snapped from fright and began to tremble, with their arms and bodies doing their best to snap out of control from Loki's manipulation. Loki noticed keenly how even his desire manipulation based on the sea of subconscious couldn't stop the demons from trembling as soon as the name was mentioned. But not one to miss out on such a perfect opportunity to study a weakened true god, Loki continued with a smile. I have one option for you, Loki said while pulling out a special monocle from his pocket and looking into the shadows in the distance. After carefully looking at it for a while, he simply tossed the monocle into the air, his fingers flicking it to give it a spinning flip. If it touches the ground, I'll leave and never return. You can keep your hopes of me doing anything with yourself after that. This one is my blessed. If you have the courage to trick him, then you must be prepared to trick yourself first. With those words, Loki vanished without a word, taking Tom with him. Gone was the gray fog and the sense of suppression that the demons felt. As the monocle flipped through the air because of Loki's toss, every demon looked at it with horror as they each slowly realized what it was. They could feel about the same level of power from the item as they had from Loki from before he revealed the gray fog. Meaning that it had everything in it from the Sequence 9 to the Sequence 4 Beander characteristics in it. A mystical artifact. The monocle reached the apex of its toss as the demons held their breaths with worry, unable to make up their minds about what they should do in this current situation. One of the demons, less affected by Loki's desire manipulations since he had applied his own desire manipulation skills onto himself as soon as he felt emotions to lessen the impact, managed to think quickly as a cold-blooded. He would sacrifice one of them to see if they could touch it without being killed and then deliver the monocle to their lord in the shadows. Within an instant, the demon amplified the corrupting desire of greed and envy into the weakest demon nearest to the monocle. Before anyone even realized what happened, the grotesque demon, half bird, half worm, split right down the middle, shot towards the monocle to consume it directly with its now exposed stomach to swallow it whole. Except, just as the demon reached the monocle and tried accommodating it into his body, he passed through it harmlessly, as if what he'd just touched was an illusion. Each pair of eyes floating in the abyss widened as their pupils shrunk to the size of a pinhole. Had Loki tricked them? Did he honestly want to start a war with the demons by humiliating them? With each moment the monocle fell, the tension in the abyss thickened. But just as the monocle was about to fall to the floor of the abyss, a single hand grabbed it out of the air. The hand was pale, as if it hadn't seen the sun in a million years. The nails were colored black with dried blood. And had Loki not left yet, the hand would have been at his feet in this moment. The hand slowly lifted as the wisps of shadows clouding the body of the man started to unravel themselves. He wore simple but fashionable clothes. Any muggle would have been stunned by their sense of design had it not been for the sickening, human skin color, leather it was made out of. Intricate reliefs containing stories of various battles were carved into the skin shirt, blood still pumping around it, highlighting the thin details, while bones formed buttons and smoldering hair interweaved in their holes before rising upwards like thin threads into the darkness. If not driven mad to death by the clothes the person was wearing, the person would have surely died of fright when they laid their gazes upon the man's head. The man's jaw was strangely normal. Lips blackened by dried blood remained plump and fresh. A nose whose pointed end, pierced by a Taurus ring, remained sharp and chiseled. Weirder were the cheeks painted with dry blood that formed strange elusive patterns that shifted around while making any that lay eyes upon them succumb into a state of dysphoria. But even weird was the upper half of the man's head. Or the lack thereof. Everything above that was a single crooked branch, filled with deep burning cracks coursing with what looked like souls of the dead, screaming in despair, shrieking for an end. Red pupils surrounded by an abyss-like black sclera peered through the newly emerging holes on his skin on his hands as they carefully examined the simple monocle held in it. Almost immediately all the floating pairs of eyes in the surroundings collapsed to the ground, not daring to even breathe in front of the person in front of them for even a second. A challenge. From a mere brat. And then the darkness trembled. Loki crashed into the bed in the room of requirements as he breathed out a soft sigh of relief. He stared blankly at the ornate ceiling above him while recollecting the strange set of events that had happened to him inside the fake abyss he'd just been transported into. Will he take the offer? Loki thought as a sinister smile found its way to his mind. The plan seemed rather rudimentary and extremely silly to Loki when he first thought it up as he decrypted the secret of the Lord hidden in the shadows. I doubt he even has another solution. But I guess I do know how I can distract her, for Rowena. I don't need to risk myself or my puppet anymore, not unless something unforeseen happens. Should I tell Helena about the plan? No. A little chaos is always necessary. If Loki's idea worked, he'd have True God willingly become his host and allow him to direct a fight with Mother Tree of Desire to distract her. Can I harm her if I advance to sequence 3 before we fought? Loki wondered as he thought about her current strength. As long as she doesn't gain access to the tenebrous world while she's still in the abyss, we should be able to fight her. Since she hasn't fully descended into the abyss, she's likely only a projection and doesn't even hold the symbolism of the Great Old One of her pathway. To have hurt Daff. Loki shook his head. No use getting emotional about these things. I'll only find myself deeper in trouble doing that. That was when Loki snapped his fingers as he watched the runes hovering around him using spirit vision. Voldemort. Loki mumbled out a question as he observed the soul that was floating in front of his eyes. The soul that he'd stolen from Harry Potter's scar. What was this doing inside his scar though? A Horcrux. Why would Voldemort make his direct enemy a Horcrux? And why didn't he use it to kill Harry easily or just take his place once he was sufficiently powerful enough? Loki frowned as he thought about what might have happened for Voldemort to turn Harry himself into a Horcrux. How did it even remain undiscovered for so long? I remember seeing a subtle mental cue for people to ignore it even if they noticed something wrong with it, but it definitely wasn't strong enough to affect a demigod. Most teachers that can see souls should have been able to spot this rather easily, yet they did not. Salazar did it. Loki frowned as he reached that conclusion. No, he probably didn't have the right time frame to do it. Firstly, the Horcrux could not have formed in the last few years since Harry and Voldemort never spent that much time alone together. Secondly, the soul was inside Harry's scar, which means that it likely formed on the night he got it. Perhaps it formed out of panic. Voldemort realized that the killing curse he cast on the Potters backfired on him, and so, he formed a Horcrux out of Harry to protect himself out of fear of dying. No, that can't be right. He already had Horcruxes before that, why would he fear death in that moment? Loki nodded while stroking his chin. Why is the god of bugs and errors not cheating when the book is right here and open in front of him? What do ya think? Loki said lazily while flicking the piece of soul hovering in front of him. The soul shuddered when it felt the corruption from the gray fog seeping into it. Yet, it didn't retaliate as Loki had expected it to. It's too weak. Loki noticed as the soul started to die right in front of him. Loki retracted the gray fog he'd allowed to poison the soul and pulled out his wand to do something else. With a flick of his wand, Loki cast a simple spell that tickled the spirit body threads that emerged out of the weak soul. Should I parasitize it fully? No, it probably has no value in combat since it's so weak. I could however benefit from learning Voldemort's secrets. Surely a piece of his soul knows much of what he's got planned, doesn't he? Loki's smile turned sinister as an eerie idea slowly built up into a plan inside his mind. In another part of the castle, Dumbledore rushed towards the Gryffindor common room in a terrible mess of panic. The fat lady's portrait swung open even before Dumbledore said the password as he used his abilities to keep his entrance a secret. Once beside Harry's bed, Dumbledore stared deeply at the scar that he'd observed a million times before in the past decade. And even though physically, the scar didn't look much different at all, Dumbledore felt a shiver travel down his spine as he realized that its most important content was missing. Dumbledore's eyes widened as the pupils shook. Although Dumbledore did not have the means to directly interact with souls, he could still verify their presence rather easily and interact with them even more easily through their body of heart and minds and manipulating their threads of fate by simply overriding their actions using the quill of Alzuhad. Even a soul as weak as the one Voldemort had left behind had a body of heart and mind that could be used to manipulate it. Although deeply depressed and fractured, the body of heart functioned well enough for Dumbledore to always have fragmented access to Voldemort's mind. So whenever Voldemort had strong thoughts, he could skim them off of Harry to make sure he was always a step ahead. And so this piece of soul had become the cornerstone in his greatest plan thus far. To complete his apotheosis ritual to become a Sequence Zero visionary. And so when Dumbledore found the soul missing, he couldn't believe it. It was as if someone had kicked him in the shin. There was someone else at Hogwarts who knew about the soul in Harry's scar and stole it. He knew it couldn't be the professors since he had implanted a deep sense of ignorance in their minds regarding the soul, whether they saw it firsthand or heard about it from someone else. So it could only have been a student or an intruder since Harry hadn't left the school grounds in the last few hours. Dumbledore's frown deepened. It wasn't possible to separate the soul from Harry's scar. Dumbledore knew because he'd tried a million times before, from trying to use Professor Kettleburn's help to using a million different mystical items. Dumbledore had done it all, yet none had ever worked. It had always been the one single variable in his plan that he could not conquer, and was also the reason he placed Harry under such heavy scrutiny all the time. Because he was worried. Worried that Voldemort would gain a way to brainwash, or worse even capture Harry through his soul left inside his mind. A soul that was deeply intertwined with Harry's own. But it seemed like Voldemort hadn't known that a piece of his soul had become trapped inside Harry the day he'd tried killing the Boy of Fate. Because Dumbledore reasoned that the Voldemort trapped within the scar was the true Voldemort all along, and the one that lived to proverbially tell the tale was the actual Horcrux. Everything would have been so much easier if he could have just separated the soul from Harry and then learnt all of Tom's secrets that way. Especially those after Tom left school and returned only after he became a demigod of the Abyss pathway. This, just like that spider in the Forbidden Forest. Although much more sophisticated, the soul in the scar has been ripped away. Nothing has been done to correct or fix the places that it touched Harry's own. Although Dumbledore couldn't see Harry's soul completely, he could make an educated guess based on how Harry's body of heart and mind had been disturbed, by how his island of consciousness in the sea of subconscious had been damaged. The work was amateurish, to put it lightly, when compared to the work someone like Kettleburn, his right-hand man to work with souls, did. Dumbledore's frown deepened as he pondered and eventually returned with a startling thought. The Gospel. The spell to steal. Is there someone else at Hogwarts that knows those spells? Gairman Sparrow. Dumbledore's brows furrowed in thought as he patiently spelled out each word in his mind. Has he mastered these spells enough to steal a soul? Dumbledore's frown turned deeper as a slight tinge of anger poisoned his gaze. Dumbledore had been pretty annoyed when Gairman Sparrow had done something similar to steal his supervision from Harry during the fight last year against Voldemort that he had used coincidences to bring Gairman Sparrow to. But he had accepted it as a warning from the boy to not try and involve him in such matters. And so Dumbledore hadn't retaliated. After all, someone having the backing of a true god that almost everyone else feared had their words weighed in gold. But this, Dumbledore found it angering. If a mere child wanted to challenge a dragon, then he would know the dragon's wrath. As such, after some thinking while hovering around Harry, Dumbledore's eyes gleamed with some ideas before he quickly walked back to the headmaster's office before sending a letter out using his phoenix. Hermione looked up at the ceiling of her four-poster bed. I didn't even realize that we were whisked away to Mr. Error's castle. But for him to personally help me out like this, I should be quick. Perhaps this is a hint from him, for me to pick up my pace. What happened with Mr. Starr's plan about infiltrating the gathering he is a part of? Has he already succeeded? Hermione frowned. No, I need to be first. I need to do the most. And I need to be the best. With her gaze firm, Hermione nodded to herself before quickly falling asleep using cogitation to relax her mind. Loki sneezed involuntarily. Who's talking bad about me behind my back? I'm innocent. I swear. Pushing that thought to the back of his mind, Loki's eyes focused on the little soul as he dived back into learning whatever he could from the fragmented piece of fragment soul in his hands. His mind islands are pretty weak. Good thing I brought him into the Saphira castle and kept him covered in the grey fog while we were outside. Although, I doubt Dumbledore's little traps would have been able to activate and send any sort of signals from Salazar's hidden domain. But, this dark magic. Loki frowned since something about it all seemed off to him. What gods fulfill the wishes of the unforgivable curses? Loki could clearly see the deep intent with which Voldemort cast the curse as he tried to hurt Harry, and clearly recognized the runes that were embedded in the spell. But that's the problem. None of these runes are supposed to do any of what's actually happening. While sure, the power rune is a partial symbol that corresponds to the Twilight Giant pathway, and the symbol of the eye is another partial symbol that corresponds to the Eye of Weakness from the same pathway, and the final major rune, the partial death rune, corresponds to the death pathway. Together they don't mean what they should. The sentence, when put together as Voldemort cast his spell, means, may you empower the weakness corresponding to death with the power I pour into you. Loki quickly messed around with other similar memories of Voldemort using his overpowered Avada Kedavra, which wasn't difficult since it seemed like that was the only spell he used. And the results were the same. Every time Voldemort used Avada Kedavra, it was the same nonsense: may you empower the weakness corresponding to death with the power I pour into you. I mean, as long as Salazar or whatever true god wanted, he could truly just use this phrase to activate the killing curse as a sort of twisted sense of humor. But something still doesn't add up. If that was the case and the killing curse was so popular, why didn't it affect or distort Salazar's or the Twilight Giant true god's morals or worldview? Why didn't he become a mass-murdering pure-blood maniac? He seemed to have been kind enough to me when he met me. While that might have been because of our shared lord, he clearly doesn't have a penchant for killing Muggle-borns. But the Black family, could he be offloading his madness? Loki's interest in the matter deepened. It seems like I have stumbled on some sort of gold mine. This might be interesting. With an icy chill in his eyes, Dumbledore quickly unlocked the mechanisms in the headmaster's office to access the Quill of Alzuhad. Once in his hand, he began to write, directly on the air. His spirituality flowed freely, pouring into the quill as fiery ink slowly formed words that weaved the very fabric of the universe. Since the true god supporting Gehrman Sparrow in his ascension is an old god, he knows much about the world. And as such, in order to gain the Beander characteristics for the ingredient of the next potion, Gehrman Sparrow finds his next target with the help of a true god. This is a reasonable development. Since Gehrman Sparrow cannot fight and obtain the next Beander characteristics on his own, as he needed a distraction for advancing during the previous sequence, he will cooperate with his friends to fulfill his mission this time. This is also a reasonable development. My lord, the acolytes await your next words. A woman said, kneeling deeply on the floor, her head close to touching the cold leather coverings only an inch away from her head. Grindelwald said nothing for a few seconds, his cold eyes looking beyond what appeared to be time and space. As if having stumbled upon something interesting, his lips curled distinctly into a smile. A flicker of amusement flickered in his eyes before his expression turned neutral once again. Tell them to write more papers about Albus. Make sure that the bones are included in this one along with the blacks. Start whitewashing certain incidents of the past, make them seem appealing only to the fringes of society such that they are willing to act on those tendencies. Make everyone else feel dissatisfied with the current order. After a brief silence, the woman spoke once again. Yes, Lord. It will be done. Once the woman walked away, the smile on Grindelwald's face showed up once again. His eyes lit up with excitement as he began to softly hum before slowly singing in the same tune with a frenzied look. Oh Bella Ciao. Bella Ciao. Bella Ciao Ciao Ciao. In a dark ground under the open sky filled with thick fog mixed with smoke and the stench of blood and burning corpses, kneeling at the foot of a grand altar, Voldemort remained silent. His ears occasionally twitched while eyes flickered underneath their lids. Above the altar lay the frozen body of a crazed woman, Bellatrix. She hovered, in stasis, her wild curled hair floating in space, moving slowly like the small-scale model of a universe. Her eyes shut, making her seem almost serene if not for the perversely happy expression frozen on her lips with her tongue hanging out like a dog's. In her hands lay the death pathway card of blasphemy. Candles of corpses stood off to the side, burning their fat through their heads, using the spine as candle wicks while the immense heat and smoke they gave off simply fell to the floor, turning it foggy. Piles of skulls and bones stood to the sides, indicating grand bonfires of fires that had already extinguished. Their mountainous figures towering out of the foggy floor like a spire reaching for the skies. Under the silence, a soft sapling sprouted underneath Bellatrix on the altar. It grew quickly, its vines twirling around as if in search of something. All of a sudden the night sky broke. Almost as if a piece of it had fallen off. A thin ray of crimson shone down onto the altar before it exploded into the environment itself. Everything in the area turned to adopt a soft glow of crimson, the corpse candles, the bonfire skulls, the very smog itself, and of course both Voldemort and Bellatrix themselves. Within seconds, what was once a vast desolate plain, in remonstrance turned animate. Trees sprouted out of the curling smoky fog of the ground. Each skull in the dead bonfires of people started to tremble and become corrupted, dragging themselves onto the unfurling branches of the newly sprouting trees. The gazes of several high-level beings landed on the area, but before any of them could figure out what was going on, a strange occurrence was birthed throughout the entire planet that forcibly dragged their attention elsewhere. And then, as if a twisted spring had come early, the skulls hanging from the tree branches bloomed into flowers, whispering every bizarre desire. Black hearts grew out of some of those flowers, flickering between tangible and intangible, the contents of those hearts changing from whispers to horrified shrieks to loving and tender melodies that would soothe the mind. A few of those black hearts soon turned crystal clear as they lost all sense of madness and corruption, but they only turned further eerie when a thin crimson light started to glisten along their curves. The smoke underneath the bizarre forest bellowed, puffing up as the branches of these bizarre trees cracked and collapsed into it. The shock caused by the fall caused the embellishments on these branches to fly off and instantly transform into the black smog themselves. These faint wisps of black corruption streaked through the air, hijacking the flow streams present in it created from the heat caused by the burning corpse candles. They flowed smoothly and blended neatly into Voldemort's robes before slowly turning into thin but visible currents that traveled into his nose slits as he breathed them in. Voldemort stayed kneeling for as long as the corpse candles seemed to have burnt to a crisp. His body perfectly still, as if a single unplanned movement could ruin everything. Once the bodies turned to ash and the trees fully collapsed with not a speck of their presence remaining, Voldemort stood up, slowly, his fists clenching as he looked down to examine them. The mountainous bonfire of skulls that had been resting silently had long vanished, but the ashes of the corpse candles had transformed. High-pitched wails pried into the air, and before long the same corpse candles that had been burnt to ashes were now on the ground, curling up like fetuses as their orifices bled out in throes. Voldemort gave them a single glance and simply waved his hand to cause all of their entrails to be ripped out of their bodies. The entrails and all the contents within them were soon dragged out, pulling with them the somehow still living people that were attached to them, as they were bound by a thick black liquid that poured out of their minds, turning into a grotesque grand tree made up of human organs. As the thick smog slowly cleared, Voldemort simply waved his hand and vanished with a silent swoop along with Bellatrix, the altar and the living tree. Stop annoying me, Daphne," Hermione said, pushing a strange cat with an unmistakably human head that was beside her with her hips as she tried focusing on her book. "Mew, RP," the cat said softly, her eyes pleading as she placed a paw on Hermione's soft hands. Hermione looked at the little cat as its ears quickly perked up and it began swishing its tail like a whip happily. "Ow. Fine. But when I'm failing class because of you again, I'll hand you over to Professor McGonagall." The cat seemed startled at Hermione's declaration, its already wide eyes widening in panic, but there was no escape. Hermione whisked away the cat as she quickly rubbed it against her cheek. "I missed you, Daphne. It feels like it's been so long since I've seen you for some reason." "Poochie," the cat exploded, painting Hermione in a fresh coat of blood, entrails and memories. The scene changed rapidly as Hermione found herself back in the same scene from before. A bloody and disaster-struck street covered with corpses of out-of-control beyonders whose life she had reaped. Her eyes, however, remained fixated on the hollow void in front of her. The place that should have been occupied by Daphne was now an empty void filled with nothing but faraway stars pulsing. Suddenly Hermione realized, although strange, the place she was a dream. But even though one part of her mind had awoken, "I can't even save her in a dream." Just as the cold and depressing sorrow began to sink deeper into her, Hermione felt something warm embrace her. A soft warmth first spread across her back before it seeped into her being as a soft golden light simmered around her. Surprised and confused, Hermione quickly turned around. A simple symbol floated in front of Hermione, hovering mid-air, somewhere. It simultaneously seemed like the symbol was quite small and right in front of her as if she could immediately grab it, while also feeling quite large and appearing to be at a distance she could never hope to reach. As Hermione observed the symbol carefully, she realized that it was separated into two parts. The first one was the inner part of the symbol that was small and looked to be embedded into the outer symbol. An inception of doors that hold a bright star garlanded by a necklace of stars. Hermione concluded as she observed the inner symbol. Doors. Does it have something to do with the true god of my pathway? The door pathway. But didn't Mr. Error tell me that the door pathway has no true god currently? Then Hermione closely observed the outer symbol that was larger and looked like an ever-shrinking loop of time. Single quote question mark. It looks like the symbol on Mr. Error's doors during our rituals. What's this? Have I been corrupted? Hermione panicked. The struggle for breaking out of her dream was almost ephemeral to Hermione as she simply and directly invoked the honorific name of Mr. Error. And without a care for anyone in the world once woken up, Hermione set up a wall of spirituality to shield her own four-poster bed from anyone else in the room before setting up a quick ritual on her bed. Huh, someone's praying to me. So late. Loki thought as he looked with slight reluctance at having to leave studying the killing curse which he decrypted held secrets he could use. Without another word to avoid disappointing his beloved devotee, Loki vanished into the Saphira castle by simply using the sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit Beander characteristics and looked at who had called for him. As soon as he entered, however, he noticed the strange glow from the symbol behind his chair and the one behind Hermione's. Hermione. What happened to her? Loki wrapped her pulsing crimson star in a blanket of his spirituality as he studied the contents of her prayer. And so even before Hermione had woken up, Loki was already peering into her dream, spotting her looking right at the symbols that had manifested in front of her. A symbol that contains doors inception which holds a bright star within it sitting above a necklace of stars, behind which is an ever-shrinking spiral of time. That's just the symbols of the door in the error pathway. But why would they appear in her dream? Single quote. Loki's mind gathered the relevant thoughts before his decryption abilities worked in full swing. I remember her trying to learn occlumency to protect herself from Dumbledore. Perhaps this is just a fruit of that, and she dreamt up the symbol subconsciously in her mindscape after being able to access it. But then Loki's eyes fell on the scene behind Hermione and his eyes widened as he recognized it. After all, the aftermath of Daphne's death was something that was burnt within his memories. It sparked a fresh idea. And so just to verify this logic, Loki turned towards divination, writing the statement. Hermione's spirituality manifested to her the symbols of the error and the door pathways in response to her dream, making her remember the incident of Daphne's death. While holding a topaz pendulum above the parchment. Clockwise. But how does she know these symbols? The error symbol she could have simply noticed during transactions. Loki once again turned to divination, and this time he turned to dream divination. The reason these symbols showed up in Hermione's dream. Repeating the statement 7 times, Loki let his spirit body roam the astral world. The first scenes Loki saw were simply the dream that Hermione had seen from beginning to end, and so when he was about to give up after assuming that it was just some strange subconscious manifestation, the scene abruptly changed. It changed to an old man, tall, lanky, with a bread as tall as himself and a crooked long nose, as if it had been punched a few times and broken a few more. Dumbledore. What's he doing? How did he cause those symbols to show up in her dream without alerting me that he was thinking of those symbols in the first place? Why's he so angry? Loki finally thought as he saw Dumbledore's eye reddening. That was when Loki saw what Dumbledore did, pulling out the quill of Alzuhad to write down a prophecy, to explain a reasonable development. Loki's mind flashed through several pieces of information, including Salazar having just promised to guide him to the sequence 2 Beander characteristic before frowning softly. Didn't I lose control of my emotions just a little while ago tonight? Loki quickly and thoroughly checked Hermione to see if there was anything wrong with her, and upon seeing no errors with her fate or her body, he conjured up Mr. World, who spoke to her through a prayer and sent the message into her star. Hermione, who had just finished relaying her prayers to Mr. Error, found herself blinded by the gray fog as an illusory message played out in front of her. Miss Magician, dreams can be a medium for revelations from the spirit world. A place where time blends together in a strange way. Seeing the death of a loved one with the symbol of authority of your pathway often indicates the need for you to get stronger. It is a warning from your spirituality, perhaps about the coming future. The vision darkened for a second before a flood of crimson light took over once again as Mr. Error himself appeared in front of her. However, he didn't speak for as long as Mr. World. Get stronger. Once Hermione was sent back, Loki was about to consider the consequences of Dumbledore's actions more deeply, since it seemed strange and impulsive, except just as he was about to think more, almost every single crimson star in his proximity that he'd frequently touched for the Tarot Club began to glow. As Loki's gaze swept past all of them, he found them all to have a similar dream as Hermione just did. They each witnessed the most tragic incident of their lives and saw the symbol of their pathways combined with the symbol of the error pathway near themselves. Sigh. Dumbledore is powerful. He truly knows the art of pushing papers. First the staff at Hogwarts and now the only staff member at the Saphira Castle. It's as if he's the bane of all things related to a castle. The prayers had come from Fleur, Dominic, and Sirius. Snape hadn't contacted Loki, and he understood that he was either talking to Dumbledore directly or interpreting the dream himself, trying to figure out why he saw the error pathway symbol in the dream along with a strange new symbol, moon pathway. Spreading his spirituality to Sirius first, since he seemed a little too excited, Loki started to see and hear his pleas. My lord, I just had a dream that my subconscious and spirituality used to warn me to grow stronger. I saw the symbols of the sleepless pathway and the symbol on the door representing your transactions, Mr. Error. Loki felt a little confused that Sirius was summarizing everything in such few words, but it seemed reasonable since Sirius was a Beyander of the darkness pathway and worked closely with dreams. It makes sense that he's able to interpret his dreams so quickly, since he was probably awake the entire time. And he's probably seen the symbol of the darkness pathway in the Black family heritage before to be able to recognize it so quickly. But without giving time for Loki to think much else, Sirius immediately rambled off. Is it related to the sudden happenings all around the world, my lord? The explosion of desires, and the escape of demons. Question mark. Explosion of desires. What's going on? Did something happen? Loki, breathing lightened slightly, he left Sirius's pulsating star for a short moment and moved over to Dominic to see if his prayers revealed something deeper. After covering Dominic's star in a wave of his spirituality, Loki observed carefully. Dominic seemed to be right inside an office space, inside the unspeakables. Loki reasoned. He seemed to have locked himself in a small room filled with stacks and stacks of papers and documents that seemed to be needing some urgent processing, but at this time Dominic was more worried about being jump scared, at least if his tone of voice was anything to go by regardless of his words. Oh great Mr. Error, could I receive your guidance about the strange dream I've just gotten? Is it related to the sudden influx of reports that have flooded into the unspeakables about demons, weak and strong, penetrating the world? Loki instantly became dumbfounded. Putting aside the wording, Loki almost instantly flicked his Sequence 3 Mentor of Deceit characteristics to peer into Dominic's mind, deceiving all his mental defenses to quickly study all the reports that had flooded into the unspeakables about the situation. As Loki absorbed each report, he found himself increasingly confused, unable to understand what was truly going on, since the situation painted by the reports was as grim as staring down a set of dragon's teeth. Mass murder in subway station, suspected to be a demon based on sacrificial rituals after killings. Unnatural, shower of blood and entrails. Loki didn't want to know what a shower of blood and entrails meant, but continued absorbing, suspected to be the work of a demon after he murdered an entire farm worth of cows, sheep, humans and other exotic magical animals. People on the streets above the Ministry of Magic have begun wildly shagging each other, suspected to be the work of a demon controlling desires. Sudden increase in rates of Muggle suicides under baffling circumstances, suspected to be the work of demons. The charging bull of Wall Street has come alive and is rampaging through everything and everyone around, suspected to be the work of a prisoner pathway Beander. Tensions between dissolved USSR and USA rise as several officers have suddenly been incited into launching weapons of mass destruction. Officers have been subdued, temporarily, by Beanders present on scene, but further connection for establishing the situation has been lost, suspected to be the work of demons or assassins. Armies of several countries have reported a sudden rise in insubordination and have launched small-scale wars between their countries. Most have been avoided with the help of locally stationed wizards, but some have been misreported after the Beanders working to report such things were found dead, assumed to be work of demons given the corruption in the Beander characteristics of the Beanders who died. Countries with a significant divide in wealth are seeing sudden uprisings and rebellions, suspected to be the work of several demons working together. It had all left him baffled, bamboozled and quite perhaps, feeling betrayed of his seat as Mr. Error for the first time in a while. But Loki calmed himself. Using cogitation to force his breathing back to normal and his mind back to a state of balance, Loki looked through the reports once again before switching to the prayers of Fleur's lit-up crimson star. Fortunately or unfortunately, Fleur's report was on the milder side of things. She only appeared to be worried about being corrupted or cursed in some way and didn't have any other information. And so, after using his decryption abilities to the fullest, demons are involved. That means Mother Tree of Desire is involved. That is further backed by the fact that right before or rather, around, the time of this large-scale incident, not only did I lose control of my emotions for a second, but Dumbledore was fully manipulated, or he let his emotions be manipulated, for some reason. I haven't yet heard from Farbati. Does that mean he betrayed my offer? No, if he wanted to join hands with her, he'd rather have done it earlier. Then there's Grindelwald or Harpo. Interesting. Loki spoke without any further delays. Dominic, who was kneeling with his eyes closed, suddenly felt a gray fog cover his eyes as he recognized what appeared to be Mr. World sitting in the distance. Mr. Strength, this is a game involving gods and angels. All you can do at this point is to sort things out on the ground level and leave other matters to the gods. The only way you can get involved is if you become stronger, much stronger. Right as Mr. World finished his explanation, the scene switched to Mr. Error sitting on his high-back chair, covered in a mysterious dense fog. He sat in a relaxedly, posturing with his elbow on the chair handle and his head leaning on his hand as he spoke. This is just the beginning. With that, Dominic was back in his office, his vision clearing up as his mind reeled at the information he was presented with. Gods and angels. That means corruption, and given that something so large is happening, it means that the true gods will be involved. When was the last time such a thing happened? The third or the fourth epoch. And Mr. Error mentioned it so casually. He truly is an ancient god. Dominic's head hung with weight as he slowly shook his head. I hope Loki will be alright in all this. Sirius similarly was singing Mr. Error's praises, but unlike Dominic, who was worried, Sirius was excited. Trouble. Trouble means opportunities. I will rise and become an angel by Mr. Error's side. His angel from the darkness pathway. I'm sure under his benevolent guidance, I can observe the change of times and become the star of each era. Fleur, on the other hand, received an additional message from Mr. Error. Contact Cheek. Tell her that I have found a way for her to repay our debt. What debt? Loki didn't know, but he had left his words vague on purpose. After all, a true god terrified of you had to have some sort of debt with you in the past, right? And so all the members of the Tarot Club began to focus on growing stronger. Dominic immediately got involved in his duties as an unspeakable. This is the best way for me to quickly digest my guardian potion. I need to grow stronger quickly if I want to help Mr. Error, and if I want to keep Dad safe through all that's to come. Sirius dove straight in by going to Walburga and informing her that he was going to meet Dumbledore directly. And given that she was terribly busy at this moment with everything since the demons had attacked several black family businesses, she failed to stop Sirius in time. Fleur set up a ritual and began to pray. I pray for the power of calamity. I pray for the power of chaos. I pray for the goddess's loving grace. I pray for the goddess to grace me with her presence to listen a message from Mr. Eyre. Fleur was interrupted even before she could finish her final words and by extension the ritual. Touching her lips, Fleur realized that her entire jaw had been petrified. Although worry filled her heart, Fleur forced herself to remain calm while keeping her head bowed. While keeping herself calm because of the petrification wasn't an issue as she was a trained assassin with good control over her emotions. Being subjected to the sudden emotional upheaval of the raw desire to throw herself at the feet of her goddess and worship it was hard. Fleur had to work hard to remain calm. She forced her head down, keeping her eyes shut and even trying to block the seductive fragrance of a temptress floating directly into her mind. The sound of shallow breaths echoed around Fleur for a few seconds as she felt her goddess poke and prod her body from various angles using thin strands of spider webs before the petrification slowly receded. Speak, but his name must not leave your memories. If I do not like what you have to say, this will be the last time you see anything. Perhaps even bring disaster to your own little sister. Fleur gulped dryly as the petrification had caused all the water in her mouth to dry up. Her heart beat rising at the thought of being unable to see Gabrielle ever again and thumping loud enough for her to hear at the thought of her own sister facing the wrath of a true god. Yes, my lady, she said, nodding softly as she spoke quickly to minimize the number of breaths she took in. He asks me to inform you that he has a way for you to repay your debt. If Fleur had looked up at this moment, she'd have seen Cheek's face scrunch up in utter confusion. Debt? To him? Why don't I know that I owe him a debt? I already cleared everything in that final battle. I don't owe him anything anymore. But then a strange thought occurred in Cheek's mind. Is it the debt of not killing me the last time he saw me? Single quote. Even still, knowing a lot more about the situation currently at hand, and trying to appear magnanimous, and no less than Mr. Eyre, Cheek spoke passively. I will think about it. There was a soft pause before Cheek continued. There are going to be a lot of opportunities for you to grow in the near future. If you make use of them, you could become an angel by my side. An angel? Fleur was shocked. There hadn't been a single angel in the assassin pathway after the fourth epic. Fleur was about to respond to ask more about the situation, but before she knew it, the presence was gone. Cheek had vanished. She looked around for a bit in confusion before proceeding to complete the ritual she started anyway, just as a sign of respect to her goddess before clearing everything up and going to search for Gabrielle in the dormitory. Soon she fell asleep beside Gabrielle, holding her close and making sure she'd never hurt her sister ever if she turned into a mindless monster. Loki sat back in his chair, his mind spinning with plans and actions as he thought about all the things going on in the world. For such a large-scale aimless action to have been taken, the only reason would be to hide something else or as part of an advancement ritual. But how did whatever's protecting the planet from the outer gods fail? Or was it some other trick? A trick that allowed an outer god to interfere so deeply with the real world? And, given the number of conflicts that were stirred up in such a short time, is this a replay of the third and the fourth epics? A battle in between humans to weaken them before swooping in to take over. After all, even Mr. Eyre himself is missing this time, since I'm only a sequence 4 while the one from the past seems to have sacrificed himself during the last war. A faint nervousness crept into Loki's heart, but as soon as it did, the warmth of the necklace around his neck calmed him down. Loki flipped it open and spotted Elaine sleeping peacefully, which brought a soft smile to his face. It doesn't matter who comes or what happens. I'll make sure I use them against them. But then he frowned again. The issue remains, however, did Dumbledore really manage to control Salazar's actions as a mere sequence 1 angel? In Nurmengard. Bella ciao. Bella ciao. Bella ciao. 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 The sudden shattering of a mirror broke the flow of the song as the old man singing it turned towards the small flaming letter tossed out from the rift with a slight frown. The letter burnt fully before it even reached Grindelwald, but he didn't mind. Instead he reached his hand into space, causing his hand to vanish momentarily as he pulled out the exact same flaming letter and looked at it. The words on it extremely simple. He has contacted me just like you predicted, he would. He ha 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 ha. But almost as suddenly as the bolt of lightning that struck the spires of the castle, flashing everything in an eerie glow for a moment, the man stopped laughing, as if he never had before. Then with a flick of his hand the shadows of his chair extended. Emerging from it was a black knight that stood tall, but more like a puppet. Not a single flicker of movement was observed before a sudden sense of heavy oppression engulfed the entire castle, filling the puppet-like black knight with the breath of a maddened life. Suddenly all shadows lengthened, blood and flesh squirmed regardless of which person in the castle it was attached to. However, before things could progress further, all those people fell limp, collapsing to the floor as the castle itself consumed them. Then Grindelwald spoke almost casually while cleaning the specks of dust that had gotten on his expensive leather shoes due to the pressure making the castle groan. I have information about where your target might appear in the near future. The oppressive feeling remained over the castle for a while before it vanished. The Black Knight turned back into the same inanimate puppet before sinking back into the shadows as everyone else in the castle continued working as if nothing had happened. A scramble broke out amongst the professors of Hogwarts as they each rushed towards the headmaster's office with their own letters delivered urgently via flow. And as soon as they bumped into each other at the rather glamorous bronze gargoyle, they exchanged understanding glances, and even before they could repeat the password, the gargoyle turned and revealed the staircase, allowing them to move on without a word. Entering the headmaster's office, McGonagall was the first to speak, her tone urgent and her hands trembling. We've all received the news one way or another, Albus. What are we supposed to do? What are the kids supposed to do? Dumbledore, who was writing something with deep interest, suddenly paused. The shimmering quill in his hand trembled a little, trying to free itself from something, before it fell onto the table with no reprieve. I'm aware, Dumbledore said softly, his fingers reaching underneath the desk for his stash of toffees, but he found them empty. Suddenly his already terrible mood turned for the worse. That was when the professors in the office, including Snape, realized that Dumbledore's gaze seemed terribly angered, the world seemed to visibly distort, and their minds seemed to be forced to a halt. But before anything else could happen, the look in Dumbledore's eyes vanished, replaced by the all-pervasive twinkle that he had when he seemed to be up to something. It left all the professors confused and baffled. What's going on? Is he angry or is he not? A spectator getting angry. We must have been dreaming because of the stress. Yes, that is a reasonable development. Before their thoughts could progress any further, it rewound out of existence. Then slowly, Dumbledore's calm voice rolled off the walls, as if the room itself were speaking with his authority. Gather all the students. Make sure each one of them is accounted for after today. They will be escorted to and from their classes. Those that are beyonders among them will be sent to work under the unspeakables to help them. A suitable excuse such as giving the best students practical work experience should do the trick. The teachers stood stunned, their minds still dazed as information was poured into their minds, bypassing every defense. If any of you are able to get in touch with your previous Beander students, see if they'd be willing to join the Order of the Phoenix or the Unspeakables at worst. McGonagall, please ask Madam Bones to authorize the help of individual Beyonders that do not wish to take sides in this conflict. Madam Sprout, please ask Augusta to keep an eye on Longbottoms. If I'm not wrong, this should be an opportunity to heal them. Oh, and supplies for potion ingredients would be very helpful. Phileas, any items the Ravenclaw students can prepare at this point in time will be of immense help. You might want to look into recruiting the Weasley twins. I get the feeling that they'll be very interested in giving demons a taste of dragon dung. Severus, Harry is added to your schedule. The statement felt so violently repugnant to Snape that he almost shattered through his daze, but Dumbledore simply continued calmly as if he didn't notice anything. I don't know what they'd say about you, but I'm sure they'd be happy to see Harry grow. Especially Lily. The professors nodded dazedly, their eyes still vacant, their minds buzzed as they slowly walked back towards their offices. Once they left the office, the twinkle in Dumbledore's eyes vanished, replaced by the same impulsive anger it had been left with once again. The quill of Alzuhad was grabbed and was used to scribble many more lines again. As soon as Severus reached his office, he got into the chair and picked up the letter he'd wanted to show to Dumbledore and then stared off slightly towards his right, feeling lost. His gaze flickered before they regained the flicker of intensity they always carried. Snape's gaze lingered for a few seconds before he quickly stood up and rushed towards his bedroom. He quickly set up an altar and began to pray. I pray for the power of the mysterious. I pray for the power of truth. I pray for the God's grace. I pray for the God's guidance regarding. And the prayer was soon answered, except as soon as the crimson fog flooded his vision, Snape's mind went into an upheaval as a sudden seal on his memories was lifted. But before anything could happen, the upheaval vanished, the seal stayed intact as if it had never been touched, and the memories behind them vanished for a moment before returning, while Snape continued doing whatever he was just doing, waiting for Mr. Error's response about the situation, seeing if he could gain more information from this supposed great being on the brink of resurrection. Perhaps he is behind all this, to create an opportunity to resurrect. After all, Mr. Error still hadn't helped him with helping the true goddess of his pathway. The crimson in his vision receded as an illusory projection of Mr. World's surfaced, who explained certain simple things to Snape that he'd already deduced. But then his vision filled with crimson once again as he found himself in front of Mr. Error, who simply looked at him for a few seconds, then said, "I'm aware," before adding a few simple words that nearly caused Snape's mind to fall into turmoil. "If you advance a sequence you can see the one you long for. You're too weak to know much of anything else." Weak. Snape almost reflexively cursed at Mr. Error as his words had triggered the same past he'd struggled so hard to leave behind. But Snape wasn't even given a chance to retaliate as his other words suddenly sunk into his realization. He wanted to ask more questions, but he wasn't even given the chance when the ritual with Mr. Error ended and he found himself back in his office space. Kneeling, utterly dumbfounded, while tears slowly streaked down his face. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.